Welcome to everyone online. Welcome to everyone here in the room. Thank you for joining us here in this very warm day here at the Botanical Gardens. I am Dr. Gabi Teren. I am the Program Manager of the National Biodiversity and Business Network of the Endangered Wildlife Trust. And it's my extreme pleasure to host you today at this event, which is the culmination of a very large project, which we're going to be talking to you about, and having your input in as well being very, very valuable. So I just want to officially kick it off and welcome everyone online, that there will be questions as well, going through a Mentimeter. For those here in the room, in terms of safety, the evacuation assembly point is out the doors towards the gate where you entered. The toilets are to my right or your left. There's a corridor. There is plenty of water available. Even though there are wine glasses, it is water. I can assure you that we are drinking here. And yeah, I'm going to introduce Kish and Chetty from the Endangered Wildlife Trust to do the official welcoming. And I hope you have a wonderful day with us here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are having a fantastic time. Thank you so much for those colleagues who were able to actually meet with us at Sandby today, but also those colleagues online. We really welcome you. My name is Kish Chetty. I am the Executive Head of Sustainability at the Endangered Wildlife Trust. Today marks the culmination of some incredible work done by the EWT with some of our key partners, the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, Business for Nature, the South African National Biodiversity Institute, and Conservation International's Global Environmental Facility. So this body of work that we've been working towards is really a stepping stone towards getting South Africa on board on the career, or perhaps I should say, the pathway towards really placing an opportunity for corporates and other stakeholders to get involved in shaping the pathway for corporates and biodiversity in South Africa. So it's quite an exciting space for us right now. There's huge opportunities to take this forward, not just at a South African level, but at a continental and global level. And we look forward to your participation over the course of the event. Again, I want to thank you, the South African National Biodiversity Institute, and Taka, who's in the corner over there, who's not just contributed towards helping shape the work that's been done, but also provided this lovely venue for us. Thank you, Ntaka. And again to Tsepang, who's going to come up and give a presentation a little bit later from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. What is critical in this space is understanding the alignment to COP16 and specifically the opportunity that COP15 provided us with as a catapult towards taking businesses along this journey. So I wish everyone well. There's going to be some incredible discussions over the course of today. We've got great panelists lined up. So I look forward to everything that we can do today. I do also just want to say thank you to the Business and Biodiversity Unit, Gabi, Catherine and Neha, and the rest of the team for really actively putting this event together. It's been hard work trying to get everything together. As you can imagine, hosting a hybrid event is not as easy as one might think. And I specifically just wanted to say that the aims of today are to provide clarity on the work being done in this space. So where are the gaps? What can we do to address it? To foster a deeper understanding of the intersection between biodiversity and business. So also looking at the opportunities around how do we take the Global Biodiversity Framework's Target 15 and how do we bring it down to South Africa? What does it mean in the South African context? How do we start to get SMMEs involved in the pathway towards taking this forward? And then also showcase the project's output. So ultimately, this was a project that we did with Business for Nature and multiple partners. What's been the outcome? And then how do you help us identify what the next step will be? And then finally, sparking meaningful conversations that actually lead towards action. So we want to get some action out of this. What is that next step? So it's not just about discussion and presentations. It's about how do we actually take this forward? And how do we collectively come up with the right next step so that we can bring everybody along the journey? So I thank you very much. And yeah, I look forward to the discussions today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kish. And again, this is a conversation today. It's really an opportunity which we had planned to have broader stakeholder engagement, hear your views, hear your opinions. Please get involved online on the conversation. I have my amazing colleagues, Catherine and Neha, who are manning the chat. There will be plenty of opportunity for you to ask questions using the Q&A functions as well as the chat. Please introduce yourself online. This is a hybrid event and there is a great opportunity in being here in person, but we want to open this up to be as accessible as possible. And accessibility and capacity building is one of the main things we're going to be talking about today. So making sure that we can reach the right people with our messaging. And also what I would like to dedicate this day to is going beyond talk. So moving beyond talk. And I realize the irony as we're going to be sitting here talking, but moving towards action. The targets, the frameworks, the strategies and action plans that we're going to be highlighting and discussing today are around meaningful change and transformation. And that's not easy. And that's been highlighted again and again through our process and our different engagement periods we've had with many of you who have participated through this project. And just want to thank the business leaders that have been here and have stepped up to give their views and be vulnerable and talk about things and open themselves up to learning as well. We're all learning throughout this process, and it is a journey. And some of us are further along in that journey and some of us are further behind, but we all have something to learn and to share knowledge with everyone here. So that's another theme that I'd like to dedicate this event to. The agenda today is going to consist of mainly two separate panels and panel discussions. That will occur after the opening address, the keynote address, by Dr. Tsepang Makholela, who's the Acting Chief Directorate of Biodiversity Monitoring and Special Service at the Department. Then we open the conversation, and our first panel will really be speaking to our Biodiversity Advisory Group members who have been walking with us as the Endangered Wildlife Trust throughout this journey this year and sharing insights and sharing some of their learnings and hopefully in a way that also sparks some conflict. I think conflict in this space can be a good thing. If we've got different views or we've got different opinions, we've got different perspectives about some of the things we've done. We want to hear from you online as well, what you think of what's being said. Let's have an honest conversation today. We're going to be taking a break halfway through, just as a body break. It'll be 10 minutes for refreshments and for those people online to probably answer emails. You're probably doing that already, but it'll be a short recess, and then we'll have our second panel, which then is hearing to a bigger community and a bigger set of stakeholders who we don't often get to engage with enough, being representatives of very different groups, and again, open conversation. And we're really looking forward to that in terms of how we can address issues from a slightly different perspective and nuance, and be open and again honest around how we can change things and work together for collaborative action. So that's the brief agenda. The conversation will be led online and in the room with a tool called Mentimeter. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. Here is your first Menti around joining the conservation conversation. Say that 6 times fast. Please go to menti.com. You can scan the QR code, or you can go to menti.com and enter the numerical code there. And we've got a couple of icebreakers, which we're going to start off with just to get us all going, set the tone, hopefully in a positive way. Please note that all your submissions are anonymous. We really want to encourage active participation, sharing your views, which we are going to be taking cognizance of and putting together some documents on our website as a result of today and everyone's voices, and how we can use everyone's voices to connect people together, to connect programs and organizations and bodies and individuals and forums together to have collective action. So let's see what the first Menti poll is going to give us in terms of an icebreaker if we're going to be showing those results. Very basic. I'm assuming this isn't related to a carbon footprint. For those of us that have traveled here today, we haven't asked that question. We'll have that conversation a bit later. But I'm pretty sure the metros are going to be, yeah. We've got a couple, Gangster's Paradise, Josie. Fair enough. I mean, Brighton, England as well. That's, Nottingham Road, great beer, fantastic. I think I know who comes from there. We've got Santon and Hoedspruit, two very different bush centres there. Cape Town, excellent. Somebody's already hitting the wine. I like it. Okay, let's move on to the next icebreaker, which is slightly more serious now, is which sector or group do you represent? And this is us really acknowledging our gaps here, that there are sectors or groups that aren't in the room and that can't join us, and we want to show the divergence of views and account for that. So we're going to be looking at how to fill in the gaps as well for those sectors and groups that aren't represented. I do like the colours. They're very, government's green, I like that. Academia and research, very important. Youth, again, one of those underrepresented groups which we are actively trying to engage with, and there's significant challenges to engaging with youth. Technology is underused, and one of our thinking around using Menti today was to try and encourage technology and youth participation. And clearly we're too old to have gotten that right. So next time I think we'll do interpretive dance, and maybe that will spark conversation. But as expected, private sector, business, NGO, non-profits, and government at 9%. These are the three main stakeholder groups engaged within this process, which we wanted to have meaningful conversation around. So happy about that, but we clearly have some work to do around getting to the other groups here. Next question, and this is the first time I'm seeing this, so this is interesting. If you or your organization or business were an animal, what would it be and why? And if you can then say whether you're an endangered animal, even better. A friendly crocodile. That might be anachronism, but okay. I'm assuming that's an organization that's taking out large chunks of the share of what's in the pool. Trying to find a metaphor there. I'm not winning. Giraffe, some of which are critically endangered. Giraffes are always curious. I like that. As are elephants. Here's a little known fact that I'm just going to intersperse in our conversation, is I did my PhD on elephants and spent a long time getting to know elephant personalities, and there was a recent paper published showing that elephants have unique names for each other, which they use in language, and they can identify individuals by a name, not in response to any other characteristic. So they can call each other Jeffrey or Thomas, as opposed to the matriarch, right? It's not about roles. So I thought that was really interesting. And they are slow but steadfast commitment and progress, and they never forget. It's very true. Very social. Right, moving on before I give you my thesis. Okay. Does the Global South business community, I think this might be a Menti that comes later. So Thank you. Some of the conversation we're having today is really off the back of, as Kish mentioned, the COP16, which happened recently in Cali in Colombia, COP29, the climate change COP. As we all know, climate and biodiversity are inextricably linked and need to be really put together and addressed going forwards as one. And I think that's been one of the criticisms of the different movements there. But one of the questions we'll be talking about today is what happened there? How were businesses involved? What value did businesses achieve? Many of you attended COP16 in particular, and what value you find from those. And we want to hear as well from the audience around the value of these large international frameworks and movements, and how that can be better integrated into how we speak about things, what we do in the ground in South Africa, and how our responses and our actions in this country can be put forward to a global stage. Because what we're doing, and make no mistake, in South Africa is some of the best global practice and movements around, first of all, integrating biodiversity meaningfully and mainstreaming in corporates and the private sector, as well as demonstrating real management of biodiversity and working together in private-public partnerships to look at protected area expansion, to look at better management. We have complex ecosystems here, and the rest of the world is taking note of what we're doing. There's some incredible, as I look around the room, some incredible leaders here at a global front working towards some very big topics, then having those very big conversations. And we want to bring that forward and also learn from other South-South analogies and partners and collaborators, and then South to North. So, Global South representation at COP16. I think we can always agree that resources from the Global South are difficult in getting to some of these big international frameworks and meetings that happen with the hybrid program not being in favor anymore. It's always great to be in conversation in the same room. But here are some interesting stats around the commitments and representation at COP16, which online, if you can add some of your viewpoints and comments on. And I think what we have here is a really interesting set of results that came out from the climate COP and representation, not looking now at Global North versus Global South, but observer imbalance with historically dominant presence, obviously, of the Global North, but gender imbalance and how that is changing. And a lot of efforts are being made to have the right conversations, but are those conversations leading to meaningful change for the representatives of those communities? And that's a question that I pose to everyone here today to think about. Right, so on the back of that, if everyone can please get out their phones or go onto their laptops. And if we can go back to the Menti slide, please, just for the question. Thank you. Does the Global South business community have sufficient access to events like the climate and biodiversity COPs? And I think I might add the word in there, sufficient meaningful access. And how can we boost representation and impact of the Global South at these summits? Recognizing the gap here that there were a couple of Southern African cities that came up in our first Menti around where you're from, such as Nairobi, but the conversations being had in the Southern African development community and within Africa, I think also need to be expanded upon. I know some of you looking around the room are working very hard to have that, but Africa as a whole, I think we need to think of new ways to collaborate across border. And I think some of that will be spoken about a bit later by some of our colleagues from SANBI, for example. Right, let's have a look at the results. The I'm not sure is interesting. And that's even perhaps slightly more alarming than the no. I think what that shows is maybe we don't care, or maybe we don't know, or maybe we don't have access to that information to think about it. I wanted to ask the question here is if they matter to the Global South, if these global meetings matter to the Global South, but I was outvoted. So we won't be answering that question today. But some of those questions I think are very important for us to know how to move forwards as a global community. Speaking of moving forwards, how can we boost representation and impact for the Global South, and with a focus here really on Africa? And let's wait for a couple of responses to come through. These mentees will remain open for anyone to come back, and we'll be posting them on our website as well. If you have more insight or would like to give more reasoning behind some of your answers, we'd really value that feedback and that perspective from everyone. So it's about starting the conversation here and continuing it forward in a broader community. Some really interesting answers coming through. Resourcing expected, as we've always struggled with resource availability. I see language came out quite strong around sharing a common language and having communication as an open tool. Getting big companies to join the summits. Interesting, because I think a lot of the big companies are at the summits, and maybe we need to get some of the SMEs at the summits as well. Education, awareness, resources, some of the things we'll touch on today. I'm going to read this one out because I think this is a great one. We have excellent examples and case studies and just need the right platform to showcase them. And I would challenge all of us here in this room today to maybe start thinking about the next COP. We always scramble a couple of months before COP to get visas and think about what we want to say. But maybe we should start as a community having collective action between the two main bodies, NGOs and business, and putting together some learnings for the next COP and what we want to say and what we want to demonstrate, and get the media involved, raise the awareness, try and aim for getting resources. And that should help connect and position the value of the Global South regarding uniqueness and showcasing some of our big achievements. And it's really some really positive answers coming through from this. So I think that's encouraging as well. Again, this is anonymous, and there's a real openness here, which I think is being demonstrated, and we're going to keep this going. I think this is one of the most important questions which we want to work on going forwards, and getting some of those underrepresented groups at COP as well. I'm taking a lot of time, so I'm going to move forward. And if we can go back to the slides, please. Thank you. The reason we're here today, and the culmination of the work that we've done this year in terms of the BAG, or the Business Advisory Group project, I just want to, for those of us in the room who've been part of the process, apologies, this might bore you, but a big thank you to all of the companies, organizations, observers, technical partners involved in the project. It's been a year of some really lessons, I think, that we've learned around how to engage with each other, and I want to share some of the outcomes with you. But what was it all about? This was a business action and advocacy for the planet project, which was done in collaboration with Business for Nature, a global advocacy and awareness raising group, with funding from Conservation International through the Global Environmental Facility. And it was done in 4 countries, South Africa, Colombia, Chile, and Mexico. And this wasn't a chance for us to have recognition that we needed to open up broader conversation between policymakers and businesses and share that. So our one objective was to establish national level business advisory groups and guide what we've said in very broad terms here, governments, and this is from the global project, in implementing business-related targets of the CBD's Global Biodiversity Framework. We focused very much on Target 15 and then moved forwards. If you don't know what Target 15 is, we can post in the link to that from the UN CBD's website. But we were very successful, I think, in establishing the groups and realizing how much harder we needed to work in getting more voices involved and making it more actionable. We had a very limited time to do this in, and I think it should have taken a lot longer. But we're going to share some of those insights today. Our second objective was to develop action plans to support the implementation of business-related targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. I'm going to just share some of our workings here and talk through some of these slides. We had key sectors involved. We did stakeholder mapping and identified some of the key sectors, being the traditional sectors of high impact and land relationship actors such as energy and mining and agriculture, a lot of the sectors that have a direct responsibility and face big risks from biodiversity loss. And we realized that we had an underrepresentation of some sectors and also SMEs. If anyone has any forums that are connecting SMEs and can share those, and we can collaborate on that, please do share them in the chat and make those available, and let us know if there's a need for it, and we can see if we can establish some of those as well. Our outcomes were to increase and strengthen business-government collaboration. And what we soon realized was there was a big need for increased capacity for biodiversity mainstreaming. What I mean by biodiversity mainstreaming is a lot of the organizations we spoke to don't have biodiversity experts within their organization. And it was a different language to them, suddenly talking about ecosystems and species and footprints and hectare equivalents and alien invasive plants and some of the things that as biodiversity scientists we take for granted, and we talk in acronyms all a lot. We needed to open up that language and facilitate that conversation. Capacity building needs to happen, and this is an open invitation to everyone to think about and share meaningful ways which you're building capacity within this community so that we can also share strengths and divide and conquer and not repeat what everyone is doing. There's a lot of initiatives happening and a lot of movements happening that we can all build capacity together and share our resources. The report from the findings of the advice from all of the businesses that were represented that gave very generously of their time will be available on our website, and we'll talk through that a bit later. But some of the things which we were set out to do in terms of our deliverables, and I want to highlight there, number 2, contributions to a national plan. So we had grand ambitions of articulating and mobilizing multiple stakeholders to create a business action plan, which can deliver the policy of related findings from the feedback of everything, of all of the meetings we had, to guide the process of updating South Africa's NBSAP, it's your first acronym, National Biodiversity Strategies and Actions Plans around, it's the mechanism by which South Africa meets the Convention on Biological Diversity's framework and how we put it into action to meet some of the targets of the framework. And I think this has been, what our outcome from this has been, we're about 2 steps away from producing an action plan for the NBSAP. The collaboration and momentum needed to do that, and I think working together with policymakers and working on large-scale national initiatives, I think we need to take a bit of time to think about how we do that properly and how we engage properly and what an action plan looks like that can go into an NBSAP and what the role of that might be. One of the other countries as part of this project had a similar experience where there was an annex to their NBSAP in terms of the biodiversity and business action plan, which was then repealed at the I think the 11th hour just before the NBSAP was published, and it became a mention. And I think that was very disappointing for a lot of the businesses which had contributed to the development of that action plan. But that is what happens, and that is life. And we need to take the learnings from all of this and still move forward and not lose momentum that we've gained through this. And I'll be asking some of our business leaders later if that's an accurate reflection of what they thought about the outcome of them, and you'll hear less from me, which I'm sure everyone will be very relieved about. The alignment and trends coming out of our suggested action points was really interesting. We tackled two themes around the biodiversity elements and ecosystems and species on the far left-hand side of this crazy flowchart, and capacity building. And several suggested action points came through around guidance and tools and what we needed to have alignment to all of the targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. In all of our conversations, we realized that there is such a big focus on target 15 being the so-called business target. Yet if you're dealing with biodiversity, all of the targets matter. And as business is, or as there's 6 global supply chains which contribute to about 90% of biodiversity impacts on this planet. So businesses are driving land use change, transformation, agriculture, fragmentation, species loss. And so all of the global biodiversity framework targets needed to be aligned, and we needed to discuss them. And I think that was a very important lesson for us to share with the global community, who are only focusing on target 15 and leaving the others just to policymakers. I think as South Africans and as biodiversity custodians within Southern Africa, we have a role to play around, for example, restoration. I think you speak to anyone who's worked with a mining company, and restoration is a word that they've written and heard hopefully 100 times over. Species and preventing species extinctions and alien invasive fauna and flora. So all of these came down to 3 themes which we wanted to then focus our efforts on. Number 1, reducing threats and how we go about that. Sustainable use, recognizing that South Africa has a very large role to play around sustainable use, and we have some new policies and papers that have come out in terms of, like, for example, the wildlife economy, which are quite unique globally. And we need to recognize that we have to use biodiversity sustainably for its goods and benefits for our society. And the last one being implementation and mainstreaming. And that, again, came back to capacity building and how we achieve that. Very quickly, because we'll post this up on our website, these were some of the responses from our business representatives when looking at how your sector contributes to achieving national targets. One of our other main findings was that all of you involved in this process, who gave your time willingly, do so because you actually care about biodiversity, and the companies you represent are actually doing a lot of things, and it's about communicating that internally and externally around some of the positive influences you're having related to all of these targets. Some of you are doing incredible work on invasive alien plant management, which requires constant resource use. reducing carbon emissions from conventional energy generation. That came up in terms of nature-based solutions and how we can think about climate change and biodiversity. Engaging with suppliers, and I think I'm going to leave that one to one of our panels later, because the supply chain and the value chain is the next step beyond all of you who are directly related or directly responsible for biodiversity or have sustainability in your title. Most organizations and companies and SMEs don't have sustainability in anyone's title. One of the findings came out that maybe it should be on every risk committee, a sustainability expert. So those are some key words. And when asked around measuring the success and what indicators are being used to track progress, the conversation came back to communication and how there's a roadblock in what we're doing and how we're communicating it. We being businesses, conservation NGOs, practitioners, environmental assessment practitioners, environmental specialists, and some of the indicators are needed to be streamlined between a business language and a policy language so that South Africa can report when we need to around the valuable work we're doing on the same indicators, and that there won't be a reporting burden placed on us if we're collecting different indicators for different methods. And it comes down to good data and good information and understanding. So regular monitoring and using that data and indicators into databases that can feed into national processes was something that was highlighted. And one of the takeaways as well that we want to launch from today is a conversation on how we can best do that, how we can best move indicators that are being used in a business world into a global biodiversity framework policy world. Very briefly, we're going to be producing a strategic roadmap on how we can produce a business action plan that will be meaningful to update the NBSAP. We'll be posting links later onto our website where you can have a look at these. We've got a bunch of documents that we have put on our website, and we encourage everyone while going through and listening to the panelists today to think about some of these and look at them and explore them and give comments and feedback. Please, we'd welcome that. And opportunities for partnerships and suggested partnerships and forums would be really valuable. So thank you for that. I want to move on to our keynote address because we are running a little bit of time. Sorry about my elephant tangent, but really privileged to have Dr. Tsepang here today to speak to us from a department's perspective. We've had a long road and long conversations with Tsepang, which have been very valuable in trying to find common language and common understanding. And I wanted to also thank the department for their willingness to participate as much as possible. I know there were a lot of things happening in South Africa this year, which took time in the political landscape, and we all had a passion to move biodiversity forwards. So thank you for that, and please join me in welcoming Tsepang for the keynote address.
Thank you very much, as indicated, I've been requested to give a keynote address, and my keynote address will mainly be focusing on the outcomes of the 16th meeting of the Conference of the Party and at the Convention on Biological Diversity, and what that means at national level, including all the work that happened through the convention. Thank you very much, Program Director, representatives from government, business, academia, non-government organizations, youth in absentia, women's groups and community groups. Special thanks to EWT and partners for hosting this event, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be addressing you on this important event. The COP16 was held in Cali, Colombia, from the 21st of October to the 1st of November, concurrently with the meeting of the parties of the protocol, in particular the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety and the Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing. Important to note is that this was the first biodiversity conference since the adoption of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which was adopted in Canada in 2022. And as such, governments were tasked with reviewing the state of implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework, particularly with regard to the national target setting and the review and update of the NBSUPs. So mainly the focus was on those two issues, even though there were many elements that were being addressed. And prior to the conference, the department undertook a number of stakeholder consultations. And it took me a bit aback to know that most of you in this meeting do not know about the COPs. So I'm willing to listen, and I'm here. I'll be here till the end of the meeting to understand what is it that we are doing wrong. Because it cannot be that you don't know at national level about this meeting when we do consultations before and after. So we did do the stakeholder consultations at national level to obtain inputs to develop a position that we are taking to the Conference of the Parties and the MOPs. And subsequently to that, Cabinet approved the negotiating mandate for the meetings. This was followed by approval of the national targets, which we have submitted as South Africa, which are aligned to the Global Biodiversity Framework. So I'm going to highlight to you some of the groundbreaking agreements that were achieved at COP. And I'll also share with you that some issues could not be addressed due to time constraints and not having a quorum. So among the key achievements, we have the digital sequence information on genetic resources, where parties adopted the modalities for operationalizing the multilateral mechanism for the fair and equitable sharing of benefits from the use of digital sequence information on genetic resources, including the Global Fund, which is called the Cali Fund. Oh, there are so many flies here. So in general, pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, and agriculture, and those industry benefiting from digital sequence information will be expected to share benefits with developing countries, indigenous people, and local communities in a fair and equitable manner, and this also has implications for us in South Africa. So if any of the businesses are using natural resources in one way or another, and they are benefiting from those commercially going forward, the expectation is to share a percentage of your profits through the Cali Fund. So I just hope we have understood each other. So in the future, we are going to focus on what that will really mean at national level. Because at the moment, we have benefit sharing agreements. We have done one for the robots, which was very successful, but this was really at the national level and didn't fit into the global agenda. So we are now going to then see how then do we domesticate this global agreement at the national level and make sure that everyone benefits from that process. And then the question that will always be asked, what about academia and those that are doing research for public good? They're exempted in this regard. So we are covered there. Then we had a new program of work on what we call Article 8J. So basically, Article 8J means traditional knowledge, innovations, and practices. You can see that there was a lot of focus on traditional knowledge and indigenous people and communities at COP. So under Article 8J, each party is expected, subject to its national legislation, respect, preserve, and maintain knowledge, innovations, and practices of indigenous people and local communities, embodying traditional lifestyles for the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity, and promote their wider application with the approval and involvement of holders of such information, innovations, and practices, and encourage the equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilization of the knowledge and innovations and practices. So parties are also to protect and encourage customary use of biological resources in accordance with traditional cultural practices that are compatible with conservation or sustainable use requirements. The COP16 also adopted a new program of work under Article 8J, which I indicated previously that it is about traditional knowledge, innovation, and practices to enhance the contribution of indigenous people and local communities. I know the question will be, what is indigenous people and local communities for South Africa? In South Africa, we have the Indigenous Knowledge System Act, which is administered by the Department of Science and Innovation. I know they've now changed the name. So in that act, we refer to indigenous communities. So at national level, that is administered through the Department of Science and Innovation. In another key decision under Article 8J, parties recognize the contribution of people of African descent, particularly those maintaining traditional lifestyle in conserving and sustainably using biodiversity. And this is basically to acknowledge those Africans that are not staying in Africa anymore, but elsewhere, particularly in developing countries, to recognize the important role that they can play in this regard. So the other one is also for the people of African descent. Around 200 million people identifying themselves as being of African descent live in Americans and many other developing countries. So they need to be recognized in this regard. On the review of progress in implementation, which is a critical one in terms of what is happening at national level. The previous COP, which was COP15, in adopting the Global Biodiversity Framework, requested parties to revise and update their national biodiversity strategies and action plan aligned with the Global Biodiversity Framework and submit by COP16. And for parties that are not in a position to do so, to submit their national targets in advance of the full implementation of the revision of the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. COP16 also undertook a review of progress regarding the national target setting and revision of the NBSUPs. And through that, there were 119 countries, including South Africa, which communicated the national targets aligned with the Global Biodiversity Framework by COP16, and 43 countries submitted their revised and updated national biodiversity strategies and action plan. During the discussion on this item, South Africa reiterated that the subsequent COPs need to focus mainly on the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans, as this is the main vehicle for communicating to the Convention and not focus mainly on the national setting processes. The Global Biodiversity Framework embraces a whole of government and a whole of society approach, and its success relies on the action and cooperation of all actors in society. The Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, which is the department that I'm coming from, encourage all actors to develop and communicate commitments towards the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. And those actors who are interested in implementing their commitments through the national targets will then be included in the revised National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan and reported through the national report. So in this particular case, even though the discussions are currently at the infancy space, it looks like business will take the option of co-developing a national target with us that will then be included in the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. But that discussions are at a very infancy stage, and we'll see how that unfolds going forward. And as a department, we have been engaging with key stakeholders in the process to revise and update the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. And we have had some initial engagement with business, and in this particular case, because business is very large, we are focusing on organized business, and we have targeted Business Unity South Africa and Black Business Council to see how we can work with them to be able to engage with the stakeholders, with the sectoral representatives in this regard. Of particular importance and mention is Target 15 of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which aims at progressively reducing the negative impacts and increasing the positive impacts of business on biodiversity, and to encourage more sustainable consumption patterns. Is one of the most critical targets for business, but while at the same time, as it was presented earlier, we acknowledge that business has got an important role to also play on the other 22 targets. This will also include the regular reporting, assessments, and transparency in disclosure, risks and dependency, and the impacts of on the impacts of biodiversity. As I indicated earlier, engagements are underway with organized business structures, particularly BUSA, and we also attempted to engage Black Business Council, but we still follow up. And then if there's anyone who knows someone that we can engage with, in particular their telephone numbers, that would be very much appreciated. And of course, the engagements are to explore the possibility of co-developing a national target for Target 15 and discuss the potential contribution to the other 22 targets. And the question, of course, that we'll ask is that I've indicated that South Africa has submitted targets. So why are we still co-developing a target of business if targets have already been submitted? So the targets that we submitted, we did not include a national target on Target 15 because we acknowledge and realize that it will not be worthwhile to develop a target without agreement with people that are going to provide information. So we then decided not to submit any target for Target 15, and as such, we are then engaging on what is it that we can take forward regarding Target 15. Other notable important achievements for COP16 include synthetic biology, invasive alien species, ecologically or biologically significant marine areas, climate change, sustainable wildlife management, plant conservation, biodiversity and health, and risk assessment. Due to the erosion of the quorum, as delegates were departing on Saturday of the 2nd of November in the morning, the COP was suspended. So in the suspension, there were certain agenda items that were not discussed, that were not adopted, even though they were discussed in length. And this include resource mobilization and financial mechanism for planning, monitoring, reporting, and review, the budget, which has got very serious implications for the Secretariat, because without the approved budget, they cannot be able to do their work. And as such, a resumed meeting of the COP is scheduled for 25 to 27 February 2025 in Rome, Italy, to consider pending decisions for adoption. In conclusion, I would like to take this opportunity to wish you fruitful deliberation, and I look forward to the outcomes of this critical work. And as I indicated, I'm here and I'm more keen to understand how can we improve in terms of your engagements, so that these international meetings that we attend on your behalf, you are also part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tsepang. And I have no doubts that we're going to be engaging further and having lots of conversation going forwards in that willingness to cooperate and learn. So thank you. And I have great pleasure to start our first panel conversation. And I wanted to welcome up to the stage my co-facilitator, Brad Nelson, the project manager for biodiversity footprinting from my team at the Endangered Wildlife Trust. And then I'm going to introduce some of the amazing panelists that were part of the advisory group, attended every meeting, gave constructive feedback and input, engagement, long conversations. Most of them were not over wine, much to my dismay. But first and foremost, representing the forestry sector is Brent Corcoran. If you can come, please run change. Brent is the manager for certification and environment at Mundi, the global forestry company. Brent's a conservation and sustainability specialist with expertise in production landscapes. He leads the Mundi EWT partnership on biodiversity reporting and holds an MPhil in environmental science from UCT with experience in biodiversity stewardship and corporate sustainability. Thank you very much, Brent. Our next panelist that I have the privilege to introduce you to is Inyiko Mtuleni, who's an environmental scientist from the agriculture sector of ZZ2. I think a lot of you are very familiar with ZZ2. I think you don't know that it's over 110 years old now. Inyiko is a SAC-NASP, first acronym for the day, you can Google, registered botanist and ecologist with an MSc in botany from the University of Limpopo. Welcome. Our next panelist is Navashni Govender, who's the head of environment at Harmony Gold, representing the mining sector. Harmony has been at the forefront of developing sustainable environmental practices and leading in the implementation of projects to meet its net zero target set for 2045. Navashni hopes to do the same for biodiversity in the near future. No small task. Welcome, Navashni. I'd next like to then introduce Daniel Jooste from Nedbank, finance sector being very important and critical in our conversations. Daniel is the principal for sustainable finance solutions at Nedbank, and Daniel joined Nedbank CIB's Sustainable Finance Solutions team in 2023 to lead the development of advisory products and services centered around sustainability and circular economy opportunities. Lots to discuss there. Welcome. Last but not least is Warwick Mostert from Anglo American, from the mining sector. Warwick is the principal for biodiversity at Anglo American, and bringing over 25 years of biodiversity and conservation management experience across different companies, business units and functions. Warwick and I have had lots of conversations about how we don't spend enough time in the field getting dirty or dusty or hot anymore, but I think you were recently very hot and dry and dusty in Mapungubwe, so jealousy. Welcome. Let's start with the panel. Thank you very much for joining us. Our panel today is really around the feedback, and I haven't heard the answers from our business representatives here about some of the questions going to be asked. So it's really about getting feedback from the process and the project that we had. So the first question I'm going to start off with, and I'm going to direct this to Brent, is what impact has being part of the BAG, as we like to call it, the Business Advisory Group project, had on your perspective or approach towards biodiversity in your sector? And if you could then share a specific example of a shift in strategy or mindset that may have resulted from the discussions, or give some of your insight. Thank you.
There we go. Good afternoon, everybody. And just, first of all, a big thank you to EWT and its partners. I think getting this process going and actually convening business together with government and NGOs has actually been really, really critical. And just to get the conversation going. So just a big shout out to the efforts. But as you've highlighted, Gabi, the move to action as soon as possible. And what does that actually look like? How's that tangible for each of us and the roles that we play in our sectors? So what you see on the screen is actually just an example of one of the forestry landscapes on our land holdings and what it looks like and can look like in practice for us. And and you'll see coming in now with the different sort of labels would be essentially how we would understand that landscape in terms of biodiversity values, and how we would understand that landscape in terms of ecological processes, as well as in terms of the drivers of impacts and what we need to do about that as a forestry sector. Some of them have our own impacts, and others such as community impacts from livestock on our land holdings. And I think the key message and the take home that we've got from the involvement with the BAGs is we recognize that as somebody responsible for 250,000 hectares of land holdings and biodiversity sort of set aside areas around about 60,000 hectares on that, we have been on this journey for a very long time because this has been in our face. And it's like that, I would guess, for any agricultural sector, any mining company that's a large landowner. Biodiversity is tangible and it's meaningful. It's a lot more difficult for the likes of the finance sector or the retail sector to really try and make sense of this. And so we're very fortunate we've been down the road. So not meaning to sound like we've arrived, because we haven't arrived, is a lot of the stuff that we discussed in the BAGs was not new for us because of the journey we've been on. But what was new, well, not new, but what was reinforced for me from a sectoral perspective is where are the other forestry players in the room? And where are the other agricultural players in the room? And now we're speaking about other large companies, medium-sized companies and small growers, and especially in the agricultural sector where you've got to work with industry bodies to really get representation. Because the concern is we keep seeing the same companies and the same representatives from each of the sectors in the room together. Where are the other players? And how do we get the other players together? And how do we give the incentives for other players to really play their role, including how we can even do better than we are already, because we've definitely not arrived. And we've seen that in the work that the EWT has been with us. So we've got a good understanding of what we need to do. It's not that we don't know what we need to do. But there's a lot of other players that need to have those conversations of what biodiversity is on their land holdings and what is their contribution to maintain or enhance their biodiversity going forward. And where's the business case for the small grower? Where's the leverage points? Where are the sort of partnership opportunities through the value chain? And I think the one sort of take home I want you to think about is if you take a hectare of landholding right there, let's call it the grassland or forest patch that's on that landholding or the wetland, you take that hectare, we are responsible for delivering on that in terms of biodiversity value. But everybody in the value chain, whether it's in the finance sector or whether it's in the pulp and paper and packaging value chain, is claiming the biodiversity benefits of that without actually co-investing into maintaining or enhancing that biodiversity. And it's not that we're saying we can't do it without everybody, but we've got to recognize that actually biodiversity achievements come back to how effectively managing that on the ground. And we've got to be able to recognize that all of us are directly or indirectly linked to that unit of biodiversity, whether it's an ecosystem, a set of species, or the processes to go with it. We need people to recognize that actually even with Nedbank sitting here, or if we had Tetra Pak in the room with us, the biodiversity that there is in your value chain is actually sitting at that hectare on the ground. And how do you work with us where we are the raw material producer in that context, trying to make the case and do well by biodiversity in a very sustainable way with the right science so that everybody's playing their role to secure that hectare together because we're co-benefiting off that. So I hope that makes sense to everybody.
Thank you, Brent. And I think that comes down to when everyone's talking about biodiversity in a business perspective, I want you to think of this picture, and that biodiversity represents a portion of land, a hectare, a species, aspects of nature. It's not a data point. It's got real meaning, and having that relationship is very important. So thank you for highlighting that.
Thanks, Brent. There we go, great. Brent, you were talking about other players in the room. One is sitting right next to you. And absolutely, this I think is a very good point you brought up, is that biodiversity is tangible. It's something, it's land, and that's why it is very difficult to have conversations with landowners. And agriculture is the agricultural sector is a big player. So Nyako from ZZ2, as a large player in the agricultural sector and one that I think is really taking this seriously, how has your company's involvement in this process, in the BAG, influenced your internal policies or practices related to biodiversity? Have there been any unexpected insights or changes that has come out of this process of you guys engaging since the beginning of this year, or I think since May? Be interested to know how you feel it has changed.
Thank you so much. First, we'd love to thank for this invitation to be part of the discussion in the table. It means a lot as we are also going on this journey. We are not perfect at it. We are learning and reflecting on our journey. Over the past 25 years, ZZ2 made a commitment to farm in harmony with nature. We call this journey Nater Budre, and it is guided by the desire to be more sustainable, but also to leave the farm in a better state for the future generation, because ZZ2, it is a family business. This approach has given us a leg up, especially when it comes to compliance, framework, and standards within our sector. And being part of the discussion in the BAG, it also broadened our perspective. I think initially we were isolated, only looking at being reactive based on the compliance that we were given, and hearing what other companies are doing from a diverse industry. It contributed a lot into our thinking, and also into when we're busy reviewing our business strategies. For instance, we have a couple of projects that we're working on, and that are biodiversity related. And however, we've yet to establish a systematic approach which effectively measure and monitor the progress of these initiatives. One of the critical things mentioned during the BAG discussion was we need to have monitoring tools. We need to have data-driven initiatives. And moving forward, this will critically and has a potential to influence our internal policies and also our practices.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks so much, Nyako. That's an excellent answer. And I really like your focus, as you say, is that one of your drivers is that you're a family-run business. So, this is not just something that is meeting a KPI. You're trying to save your farms for future generations. Yes. And also excellent point on the requirement, the need for monitoring tools. That's obviously a hot topic, a hot question, around this whole concern. But I mean, as Brent did sort of bring up, it is also something related to something tangible on the ground, and it's not just a data point. But that's a great response, and we thank you for your candid answer.
Thank you.
A question for Navashni now, coming back to your experience in this process. Has there been any achievements from this process in terms of your sector and the mining sector? And leading off of that, has there been any potential role for collaboration with some of the other members of the business advisory group that you've interacted with?
Yeah. Thanks, Gabi. Thanks for the question, and good afternoon, everyone. So, I mean, as with most sectors in the economy, mining is also heavily reliant on the natural resources, the goods, the services that is actually provided by biodiversity and conservation. And so we also know that mining, in its very nature, is quite an intrusive process. And so if environment is actually not taken, up further in the value chain, being embedded into business strategies with various operations and various companies, especially influential companies, the fight is basically lost, unfortunately. So the opportunity does exist for mining companies to actually make positive changes, and it doesn't always necessarily have to be this kind of tick box exercise. It's not about meeting commitments in your EMP. It's about what is the right thing to do, and are we actually doing the right thing? I think you mentioned it earlier. We have a direct responsibility in relation to biodiversity and conservation management. So the platform that has been provided by the Business Advisory Group, which I'm very fortunate to have been invited to, by the way, has actually enabled our company to actually identify and manage what we perceive as a business risk, which is biodiversity, conserving natural capital. And now that we know what we need to do as an organization, we can basically take it forward. So we've already started having very facilitated discussions with the decision makers at Harmony, explaining to them how we could actually contribute to the global biodiversity framework targets, what it means for Harmony as an organization, and what it means for the country as well. So as a company that's just basically completed its biodiversity footprinting exercise in collaboration with EWT, I think there's been a lot of learnings that has come out of this entire process. One of the key things for me was, when we started, it was such a daunting task. We didn't know what we were going to expect. And through the collaborative efforts and the discussions that actually took place from the beginning of the year, and realizing where companies like Mondi, like the Glencores, where they are in their journey, what worked for them, what didn't work for them, the learnings that we got was just absolutely incredible. And that is something that we can now take forward and in order to roll out what we believe is the best thing for the environment at the end of the day. So it's been an incredible journey. So I know you said you don't know everything, but to us, you actually know quite a bit. Brent.
Definitely don't know everything.
You just need to label your pictures better with grasslands and forests in the background there. Thank you so much for that answer. I really appreciate that. Brad?
Great, thanks. Daniel, we've spoken to some of the people that are directly on the ground. So now I think a bit of a trickier question to you. Could you highlight a key biodiversity initiative that Nedbank has implemented recently that aligns with the BAAP goals, and what measurable outcomes have resulted from it?
Sure, Brad. So first of all, maybe just apologies for my slide. I didn't get the memo even about a picture. I did get the memo, sorry, Catherine. I didn't do a very good job of it. Maybe first of all, similar to Navashni, I think it's been a great privilege to be part of the BAAP meetings this year. Maybe just to share a little bit of background for me personally. So you mentioned that I joined the Sustainable Finance team in 2023. I've been with Nedbank for about 18 years already. Most of that time in the corporate finance or the M&A team. And then moved across last year, and then very quickly made the connection that my kind of lifelong passion around nature and conservation and spending time in the bush was suddenly reachable from a work perspective, and you can kind of do both at the same time. And then shortly after that, I saw the invitation for the BAAP meeting, which I accepted in May, and it's been very, very insightful for me. Coming, obviously, given the background I've just given, from a very low base, from a biodiversity knowledge perspective, it's been quite kind of foundational for me. So from understanding the global biodiversity frameworks, how corporates are thinking around their targets, the work that's being done, all the various policy mechanisms that are being discussed and put into place, as well as just understanding the landscape, who are all the different players playing a role in this very important matter. Then maybe just to talk a little bit about Nedbank. And I thought I was being quite innovative and clever this weekend when I was thinking about what I was going to say, to not focus on a specific kind of physical conservation initiative, but to talk around skills development and capacity building. And listening to all the conversations today, I think it was quite well timed. So that's really what I want to talk about. I mean, Nedbank, going back decades, has done a lot from a conservation perspective. I think Samir's in the audience here, and he manages the Green Trust, so I'm not going to try and tick initiatives here and be embarrassed. But there's a lot on that front. But like I said, what I want to talk about is around capacity building and skills, because I think that is critically important in this space. I think in many instances, the kind of environmental, biodiversity, even broader sustainability challenges that we face, the resources required and the skills are there. It's just a question of bringing it all together and to your point, taking action now, right? So from that perspective, Nedbank has done a lot internally around webinars, thought leadership sessions, online training material, like really a lot of the stuff, and it's accessible to all staff, I think even some contractors and clients potentially as well, just to try and up that skill set. Because I think what we need to do, and Brett, you alluded to it, our main role as financiers, as I see it in the biodiversity kind of arena, is around enabling our clients and letting them do what they need to do. But we can only do that with the skills. So through all that training, we're certainly upskilling a lot internally, and I think even busy rolling out some initiatives towards our clients. And I think as time goes, we'll probably be doing more of that, especially as we enter our next phase with our WWF partnership as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And if any of those capacity building material is available publicly, we'll share those links after this so that people can also access them and share in that. I think it's great to recognize that natural capital depends on human capital and building that as well. So thank you. Warwick, to my left. You recently attended COP16. You were involved in the maelstrom of events and things and whirlwinds that happen at a COP. What can you share in terms of the key takeaways from your perspective for the business community, particularly if a focus on the mining sector from your experiences and your conversations, and how do you think these insights may shape Anglo-Americans' future in biodiversity?
Thanks, Gabi. And it was interesting seeing that stat earlier around the questions around COP, and I guess the understanding, I think, to Tsepang's point about do enough businesses, but not only businesses, I guess do enough practitioners understand the importance of the COPs and the various COPs and what we want to achieve there. So, I mean, it was thanks to EWT and the network that we went as observers, but also as a business sector and a business community. The mining sector, a bit like what Navashni was saying, and maybe even Brent as well, is that we've had a pretty good relationship with understanding, our environmental impacts, our biodiversity impacts as well, just by the nature of where we have our industries and where we have our footprints. So a lot of what is, discussed at a high level is not necessarily new to us. And I think, one of the biggest takeaways, certainly from COP, and it was one of the priority areas, was the alignment between these global goals, which are all, and the various targets, and the alignment between that and the NBSAPs. And I think it was, part of the BAG group, I can't remember which workshop it was at, that you guys presented some of the preliminary, insights into those NBSAPs that were getting published. And it was eye-watering to see the variety between them. I mean, some of them read like an advertising magazine. Others, you sort of got very little detail in there. And so and I still am, I was very disappointed that was one of the priority areas that got discussed a lot, but actually never really got got any meaningful outputs. So, it doesn't even mean it's the mining sector. If you take any of the business sector, what do we need as a really achievable and meaningful framework in order for us to set and show that we can demonstrate contribution to some of your national targets and your NBSAP is a clear framework that a company can say, okay, fine, I might be a forestry company or a mining company. This is what I'm doing because we've had this relationship and we've been doing this for many, many years. But there's also that opportunity within the wider landscape. And then making that link between those country NBSAPs and obviously ultimately the global biodiversity framework goals. And that's not there. And this, to me, it's just, one of the big sort of takeaways. So for us, having an opportunity to participate at the COP was critical. It was good in terms of the fact that Anglo, we have a footprint in South and in LATAM. So we actually, and again, part of the sort of capacity building, we said the site team and the members who are on our operations, they need to understand what is it that we are negotiating at the COP. And yes, if you're a negotiator and a representative of your sort of your national country, you probably came away that yes, we didn't quite meet all of the expectations. But at a business level, they found the interaction incredibly useful. The opportunity to really engage with your peers. Not only that, you've got an opportunity to walk out of a meeting hall and meet the Minister of Environment for Brazil and for Peru. And so that the opportunity for our practitioners was critical, and it was suddenly like, okay, I get it now. We've got our company targets and commitments, be it no net loss or net gain or net positive impact. We know what our South African national targets are. I'd like to challenge Tsepang about, the opportunity to get more engagement on that. I think there is still a huge gap. But then more importantly, those practitioners can come away to say, right, I understand. I can make the link and I can really be part of the conversation in terms of what we're there. So yeah, for us, a really, really good opportunity to participate, to be part of the conversation, not maybe necessarily on the negotiation side, but whatever was happening around that and the side events and the opportunities to discuss these material issues was incredibly valuable.
Thank you. And a follow-up then in terms of the conversation and participating. Do you feel like people were listening to what you were saying when you were presenting at side events or engaging? Or do you think people, and so openly listening to what you were saying and learning from it? And what was your experience of that?
No, I think what was interesting is that, you sort of had the global north, global south. I attended one of the sessions and it was actually a SANBI session on the relaunch of the national priority areas. We have got the most unbelievable data set around biodiversity, around impacts, around priority areas. And there was an acknowledgement from the global north to say that some of the global south countries have actually, gone ahead in terms of some of these. There was a SADC-led session on that. We had representatives from Mozambique, from Botswana, from Namibia, all presenting on the tools that they have and the resources that they have. And it was incredibly, encouraging to see that we've actually got that. And so I think that was a really important part, is to say we've got good examples. We've got some fantastic data sets. We've got really an opportunity to actually, be in terms of some of the forefront on this. We've just got to make that, I think, the important connection now between where we as the private sector can help meet some of these national targets, but also some of the sort of landscape level commitments.
Thank you very much. Brad, over to you for an audience engagement.
Yeah, if we can go on to the next slide, please. And yeah, if we can once again get our phones out. And here's the mentee question that we want to ask you all now. What drives or would drive your commitment? Sorry, you can go back again a slide, please. Addressing the biodiversity challenges in your organization. So if you are a company representative, please go wild. And if you're not, also use your imagination here. What do you think are the drivers? And I think there have been some mentions on stage here that I thought were quite interesting as well. We'll wait a little bit. There we go. Getting some. Ooh, I don't know what's happened now.
I think we
Next
can
one.
give the audience online time to vote, and then we can go on
We'll
to
come
the
back to
next
it.
set of
Absolutely.
questions. Thanks, Brad.
Okay, Brent, then on to you, sitting right next to me here. I think you did earlier on share that there are a few challenges that are faced in addressing your biodiversity impacts, and some of them are regulatory compliance, resource limitations, data gaps. Can you share an example of an innovative approach your company or the forestry sector is exploring to overcome these such challenges?
Yeah, so back to that picture again. I think, the one thing the forestry sector and as a company we're doing is continuous improvement or innovation. It's a constant drive with trying to stay competitive in South Africa, but more important globally as a relatively small pulp and packaging company relative to what's happening in South America and China with the development there. So there's a constant focus, and it's fascinating to be part of that journey as a sustainability specialist. And we've seen a little bit of that on the environmental management space or the conservation space, about even the use of drones now for controlling alien plants. And not just controlling, but obviously before that is all the mapping and the analysis and things, and how we can actually do alien plant assessments with more remote sensing technology or drone technology, or where it might be useful. But what I want to come to is the partnership with EWT that we've been on for the last couple of years, similar to Navashni's input. One of the things with all of the work we've been doing, and I don't know if the mining companies or others have seen the same, we've done so much through the years, the bits and pieces of work on species, on ecosystems, on addressing threats, realizing opportunities, but we've never really had that process, that opportunity, that tool to pull everything together in the one space at the same time from a biodiversity assessment and management perspective, and how well we're actually doing and how well we're actually measuring ourselves and moving beyond just extent into condition. And if you look at that picture, we can say, well, we set aside, if you just take those corridors, 30 or 40 hectares that might be in there, but actually what's the condition of that? And that's actually the more real, more meaningful score of what's happening with biodiversity in our land holdings, whether it's alien plants or bush encroachment or overgrazing because of livestock and not being able to get effective fire regimes in place. And so the innovation for us has been really about this partnership with the EWT through the Biological Diversity Protocol with Gabi, previously Hannah, now with Sean and Joel Houdet and others in the EWT team, is really just pulling together all of the biodiversity data we've had as much as we can, the insights we've got, being able to draw certain conclusions off imagery and things, and be able to say, through the BD protocol, through a tool with the accounting principles, how well are we actually doing, even at a desktop level with that initial analysis, and where do we go next? And it's quite a stark picture that comes back at you, Navashni, about the BD protocol, and it enables us, because of the way the tool's been designed, enables us to take the information from each specific unit on the ground, whether it's a corridor like that of 10 hectares, or a riparian zone or a wetland, and able to pull that picture up to a forestry management unit level, but back down again to practically what it means in the ground. And we've got to always be careful of only looking at the big picture. We can say, well, we're doing this well in biodiversity management at the FMU level of 250,000 hectares, but it means nothing unless you can draw that back through a thread, through a tracer, back to the unit of management on the ground and the ecosystem and the species that's there. So for us, this has been a really, really great journey where we've been trying to balance the need for scientific rigor with cost-effective monitoring and management, and really looking at something that we can now say, this is where we stand, this is where our journey goes to next. And this is where we can direct our management and our monitoring efforts that will flow through this tool into continuing to reflect back to us as an internal management tool that can then also be used for reporting and disclosure. So it's always been about both, Gabi, about the internal management and saying this is where we can prioritize action going forward. This is where we can put the effort and the focus to really shift the needle in our performance, making some hard management decisions, allocating scarce resources, at the same time being able to reflect that through various reporting and disclosure frameworks. That being said, we have a challenge in Mondi that we we are not necessarily comparing apples with apples out there between the different reporting and disclosure tools. And with the rigor and everything that's in this great sort of approach and tool that you've got here, our challenge right now is, are we ready to disclose that when others are using very different types of global data sets with far more core scale information and data, and we cannot actually put that information out there because we would be seen as the worst performer on the planet because of how rigorous and detailed the focus is. And so we're in that journey, in that process at the moment of working out what reporting and disclosure would look like. But for the meantime, we've got a great tool that we can work with to direct all of our management and monitoring efforts going forward and continue to make a difference on the ground, which is where it really matters. Okay.
Thank you. And I think if there's any sustainability reporting staff or people involved in that online or even in the room, if you can join the chat as well, just to give your perspectives on reporting and challenges and communicating the differences between just reporting and then actually making changes because of reporting. There's a lot of resources go into developing beautiful sustainability reports with beautiful pictures, which then land on someone's desktop, and then the next year is repeated again. And we don't learn enough about doing, I think, from that. And yeah, a lot of sustainability professionals, reporting professionals, I think, online could share their experiences. That would be really valuable as well.
Just if I can, just on that, just highlight just how important it must first be about internal management performance before it gets anywhere near the public facing on the reporting and disclosure. We've got to be able to be doing it well before we can say that we're doing it well. You know, it can't be the other way around, or only about saying what we think might be good.
And I think just even language and communicating what biodiversity even means is sometimes a challenge.
Yes.
And Daniel, if I can come to you then from a very different sector, different experience, apples and oranges, looking forwards to what Nedbank wants to do, what do you believe should be prioritized to accelerate biodiversity efforts in your sector, in the finance sector? Maybe these are specific policy or regulatory or partnership needs. You mentioned WWF and the long history partnership that you have there, which I think we'll touch upon in the second panel. But where are your priorities from the finance perspective?
Sure. So I think you touched on the first one. I think partnerships are critical. I think in the finance sector, certainly, and we see a lot of discussions in that space. I think in all sectors of economy, I think even simplistically, the BAG meetings there, right? It's a form of partnership, and it's been incredibly useful to bring a bunch of information together that we all learn from much quicker than we would have kind of separately and individually. So I think that's the first thing. I think from a policy perspective, I think we've spoken a lot today around, you know, how macro or national policies filters down and how that impacts on what businesses can do and what kind of targets they can set. So I think clarity and certainty, as much as it is possible in a fast evolving space, is very important. I think something else that's very important, I think progress is being made. TNFD, sorry, I was going to talk about financial reporting, TNFD, potential talking around nature accounting standards. I think getting that common language for us as financiers or for the finance sector to translate what needs to be done from a conservation perspective and what can be done from a financial perspective is critically important. I think there's a lot happening, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done. And from our perspective, a key kind of focus area in the next 12 to 18 months. And then I think maybe just the last thing, which I'll touch on very quickly as well. We've got a good example in South Africa already through the conservation tax incentive that was introduced a couple of years ago. You know, something else that can be thought around, tangible incentives for business and for society to take action where it's most needed. I think there's many shapes that can take. Many have been adopted globally, but I think it's a discussion that's worth having.
I think we'd all like to have a conversation around tax incentives. So thank you for opening that up.
Sure. Great, thanks, Daniel. Navashni, yeah, I seem to keep on focusing on all the questions about the challenges. Navashni, how have the industry-specific challenges, such as in the mining industry, and we know there are quite a few, shaped your approach to integrating biodiversity into your company's goals as you start on this journey with us?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. I remember our drive around Harmony operations quite clearly, and the look of shock and horror when I was explaining some of the challenges that we do have in the gold mining sector that we face on a daily basis. But I think that I believe that there's a lot of opportunities with collaborating, in the mining sector and with other mining-related companies as well. If you think about the contribution of mining to the South African, economy in 2023, it contributed 654 billion rand. And that's not even, accounting for the amount of jobs that the mining sector actually provides out there in the economy. So there's a lot of opportunities that can be explored. The possibilities of partnering with other mining companies, creating larger protected areas, conservation areas, rather than trying to do certain conservation efforts on your own. The possibilities are absolutely endless when it comes to that kind of thing. Meeting target 1, target 3 of the GBF as well. So I think what is comforting as part of this bag sessions as well is that it's a very collaborative approach, like I've said before, but it also is encouraging businesses to do the right thing. It's more of a carrot approach rather than a stick approach. And when you have that kind of approach that you are going in with, you get a lot more buy-in, not just from regulators and government and everybody else, but also internally within companies as well, because you are actually creating a shared vision with very specific values that you want to put in place. So when we talk about challenges, like I've said, we've got illegal mining, we've got overgrazing, it's the vast amounts of land that we own as a mining company around our operations, in 3 or 4 of the provinces in South Africa. It makes it almost impossible for us to fence a lot of these areas. We struggle with theft, we struggle with vandalism, and it's just unfortunately the way the country is at this point in time, and mainly due to the high levels of unemployment and that kind of thing. So if you just try and do it on your own, it's not going to happen. So you have to be very clear and concise about how you're actually going to approach it. So when we look at things like rehabilitation, Brad, there are some really good examples of rehabilitation of mine-affected land out there. To now be able to rehabilitate mined-out land and return it to those original ecosystems that used to be there prior to mining is something that we never even thought about in the mining sector, to be honest with you. So there's so much potential in terms of that. And Gabi, we also spoke about things like how do you try and reduce the amount of overgrazing in some of this land that we think is really good potential from an ecological perspective, and we can't do it alone. Again, you need to have a more collaborative effort, not just with surrounding mining communities, surrounding mining companies, but also the actual pastoralists that are on our property that are grazing. So you're going to have to teach them about things like rotational grazing, providing proper vaccinations for their cattle, and you actually mentioned it previously, providing a market, introducing them to markets in which they can actually sell some of their produce and things like that. And that's the only way that you're actually going to protect these, I want to call it isolated pieces of property that have really good biodiversity value in it itself. And then lastly, I just wanted to say that, we also need to get more academics looking at the impacts of climate change on biodiversity, and then vice versa as well. And you did mention it at the beginning of the session. How do we use natural capital to combat the effects of climate change? Because it is just absolutely so interlinked itself. So we know that there is a lack of, follow-up academic assessments after initial assessments have been done. So how do we actually get people, back in the room to follow through on certain studies that have been done previously that we're still craving data for, and taking that forward. So, I think that's my.
Thank you. And I think highlighting the need for long-term funding and long-term studies, we've known it's a problem in science, which is just getting worse and worse in many respects. And we need those answers from long-term studies. I mean, South Africa pioneered, as you mentioned, some really great long-term mine rehab work, and that's been used all over the world. So we've got a lot of lessons to learn. So thank you. Brent mentioned apples and oranges. Daniel, you mentioned carrots and sticks. Coming to tomatoes. Terrible, I know, terrible puns. Nyeko, in your perspective from ZZ2 and agriculture and some of the wicked problems that you face, what have been your obstacles in your sector? And particularly within, maybe internally in aligning your company's business strategies, has the process of these conversations with the business advisory group helped address these? Has it not? Where do the conversations need to go to help you?
Thank you, Gabi. I think one of the main or major obstacles when it comes to implementing biodiversity targets within an existing business strategy stems from the viewpoint that conservation and agriculture have conflicting goals. I think even though there is a gradual shift in mindset, but it still lingers there. And we do realize within the agricultural sector the impact we have in the environment, but also the success of agricultural sector is dependent on the environment, the biodiversity, because without the ecosystem services that withdrew from the environment, there is no agricultural sector. So that, even though there is a change in mindset, it still lingers within the spaces when discussing biodiversity-related initiatives and also in a strategic level of things, because it's easy to do invasive clearing near a production than in unproductive land. There won't be funding to do that. So within ZZ2, as we are busy reviewing our business strategy, we realize that our main strategic goal is to excel in farming. But then for us to be able to do that, we need to take into account that we require nature and we are dependent. So the success for us to be able to excel, we need to have a balance. And some of the critical questions that we ask ourselves during this process is that how can we effectively and practically align the biodiversity targets within our operations and also as part of our core business strategies and objectives. And this process involves engaging various stakeholders within the company with diverse business interests. There's that. Another one is how do we interpret and apply in a local context and also in an agricultural context this global biodiversity framework. Like, for example, even in some of our voluntary certification compliance, there is an emphasis on species-specific conservation. However, for us to be able to do it in a sustainable way, our approach is landscape conservation. And so trying to integrate that and to also interpret it within our system, it is an interesting. Another example is the invasive species management, when do we do that? Because within the production farms, because the farmers are busy with the other thing. So in terms of, instead of like ticking box, we're trying to integrate. So we identify like a time where they are not busy with harvesting, with the production, then they can focus on doing land restoration. I think another challenge is ecological literacy. Not all companies within agriculture has the privilege of having a biodiversity team within their payroll. So that is a huge challenge.
Thank you. And I think if there's any conversation to be taken forward from here is how to better engage agriculture as one of the major drivers of land use transformation and habitat loss globally. And I, listening to you speak, I was thinking also of drawing parallels with the wine industry, which has faced similar challenges and I think also followed similar journeys around moving from species to landscapes to planning to bottom up and top down. And South Africa has pioneered some very good biodiversity initiatives, just mentioning things like Spear Wine Farm, Vergelegen Wine Farm, again with biodiversity specialists employed to drive that change. And we need to capacitate the youth and our students to be ecologists and seek jobs in agriculture and in these sectors. I think that's a starting point. So let's have conversations in academia as well, coming back to academic. Thank you very much.
Can I please add something? I think when talking about biodiversity targets, I think it's the same thing for forestry. We need to recognize that both industry, like the forestry and agriculture, it has a potential to contribute into the targets, because we see ourselves as custodians of land. There is a vast of land in which it's not productive. There is an opportunity to utilize that to contribute to the targets. I think the challenge is how the conversation is addressed. I'm thinking about the first time when we proposed that we should set aside land for conservation purposes, and you had to explain to the CEO why are we just putting aside land and not utilizing. So it's a long process that requires patience and a lot of explaining the same thing over and over again.
I think I can relate. Thank you.
Thanks so much, because that really, I think what you just brought up now really segues into my next question to Warwick, about your sort of how you are integrating, the global biodiversity framework into your business. So Warwick, as our visitor to COP, as an observer, the most recent one we would love to hear about your experiences of Cali, but maybe if you could rather just tell us, how do you feel the discussions at COP16 address the alignment between these global biodiversity the global biodiversity goals and these sector-specific actions that have actually been brought up on the stage here? Are there any particular strategies or partnerships you believe could enhance this alignment for businesses?
Thanks, Brad. The bag. There we go. There's your answer. Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons I put up on the slide is that point around collaborative and not competitive, and it came out in a quite of the other panelists' just feedback now was the link also to disclosure, and absolutely disclosure, as we know, is important. It is always going to be a corporate imperative. Yes, TNFD are kind of is gathering probably more momentum than TCFD had. But what we must not forget is that it's not there forever. Just like TCFD, TNFD is not going to be around. It is a guideline. It is a framework to say, this is a reporting framework that can be adopted. It's going to be absolved into others. And, one of the points made at COP, particularly around the disclosure, is that we must be careful that we don't end up going down a very convenient tick box exercise for corporates. So it's all very well, we've done this disclosure. Why are we doing it, and what is the important message around this is what we as a company are doing? So it's important to disclose, yes, but what's more important is to your question is, what are we disclosing on? And so I guess the benefit of having the business advisory group and having our diversity in companies and stakeholder representation is exactly that. And again, to one of my earlier points, we have fantastic examples. We've got examples of, for example, ZZ2 having what we would see as non-operational land holdings. Vashni made the point as well. Mining companies, not only mining companies, a lot of other companies have a significant amount of land holdings that isn't their sort of primary production focus. There is value in those, and this is the important point around linking those to potentially some of the NBSAPs and the targets. So the action is, we've got a collective together. The NBBN has been around for a number of years. This group, has only been about more recently, and it's very GBF focused. But what is it that we want this sort of grouping to do? We need to be able to get collaborative action. It's not about everybody going off and doing their own thing and tick boxing and saying, we're the number one reporting company on this, or we've achieved that. Yeah. What can we do as a collective and as a collaborative? And I think, the bag is exactly that. It's a great start. What we must make sure is that we don't lose the momentum. There are sectors which are underrepresented. There are other businesses out there that need to participate. And come to the next COP, we can certainly present some of this, and again, demonstrate that the Global South is actually moving a lot forward and a lot further ahead than some of our other peers.
I think that's an excellent answer and insight. Thank you for sharing. And I want to take this opportunity now to open up for questions and suggest that we can take 2 questions from the audience here in person, and then we can go as well if there's questions from the online audience. And if you could please then just identify who you'd like to direct your question to, and we'll take 2 questions and then 2 responses and then 2 questions. If anyone here would like to ask any questions.
Good afternoon, colleagues, our leadership, and also the panel. My name is Latras Khasago from Rainwater. I'm new to this platform. It's quite eye-opening and informative. I have a few, 3 questions, not necessarily specific to directed to a specific panelist, but whoever is able to answer may. Number 1, how do you deal with the risk of greenwashing in terms of this reporting and disclosure? What are the verification mechanisms that are in place in addressing the risk of greenwashing? And secondly, what are the benefits for organization and in terms of the reporting and disclosure? I know in climate change side, if you are going through that channel, you register your emission, you get into carbon trades and all that. In this particular biodiversity, do we have such benefits? The second one is on just a little bit of confusion in terms of sustainability reporting. I know in environmental aspects, it means one thing, and in finance as well, in line with finance standards, it means another. And we have COP16 and COP29, which I was a little bit confused. I even thought I got my numbers wrong. Is there a specific reason why they are both COPs? Just to iron out the confusion thereof. And then the last one is on the funding of the initiatives. It's a common sense that business are there for operations and profit. And now the whole lot of green initiatives that are coming to forth. We have ESG, we have climate action, We have, which is quite old, EMS, ISO 14000, which they are deviating, and they are good initiatives to conserve the nature, but they require funding. Today, I personally just discovered the biodiversity as well, framework as well, which is another initiatives. I don't know, the kind of fundings that are there, in addition to the organization budgets and all that, is there assistance in that regard, particularly maybe for small businesses? And I don't know. That's my submission. I thank you so much for lending an ear.
Thanks very much and welcome. Okay, that was, yeah, I can try and unpack some of those questions. Let's start with that first one, the risk of greenwashing, and I'm going to pick on someone here. Okay, there we go, Brent. You go for it first.
No, I thought I'd, am I on? Yeah. I thought I'd come in on this one. It is a big issue for us as Mondi, and the mantra, which I think comes from ISO, is do what you say what you do, prove it and improve it. But the biggest sort of ethos of Mondi that I've discovered, being with the company for 11 years, is we would prefer others to tell our story than us telling our story. And I think it's a company principle that a lot of us should be aiming for within the respective companies and sectors we work for, where we invite people in as partners, and so not in a sort of consulting client sort of customer role, but we bring the EWT or other NGO partners in, and we are entirely transparent and open and honest about our data and what our data is telling us, obviously under initial confidentiality, for the purposes that we want to have those very transparent and open discussions. And we've already seen that in our long-standing WWF partnership. We've seen it now with our more recent EWT partnership, is let's do that together well, so when we get to the point of reporting and disclosure, the EWT will know whether we are telling the true story or not. Does that make sense to everybody? Is we actually got to take those risks, be open and honest and transparent in that initial partnership approach, working together with others who want to be constructive with us. There might be certain NGOs that wouldn't like that sort of approach, but we believe that there are a number of NGOs and civil society organizations to do that. We can be real and honest about the warts, I would use that as a phrase, about the ugly stuff that's in there, as well as the successes, the case studies that we've been alluding to as a panel. But in that process, when we get to tell our story, whether it's through SD reporting or whether it's through biodiversity disclosures, we know that there's going to be somebody holding us accountable to, are we really being true with what we are being true with, or what the stories that we're telling. So that'll be around the risk of greenwashing. I'll just put that out. I volunteer because I felt that's such a critical part of it. And I know that's a challenge. That's easier said than done. But we've got to get to the point that we stop actually keeping information to ourselves and only having a little bit that we expose to others, but we actually just tell the story for what it is. Because it's a lot easier then to walk a journey together and actually to tell our story from there. That's my 2 cents worth on greenwashing.
Thanks, Brent. No, that's great. I mean, really, yeah, we do see you do take it quite seriously, and rather don't, as you say, share with us, but don't say something that you're not prepared to follow through on, and that's worthwhile. If I got your next question was on what are the benefits to an organisation, on going along this biodiversity journey, and I'm trying to toy between Warwick and Navashni, you answering this, because you just started this. So I think this is the thing, is that you having to sort of motivate this, to your executive, and maybe if you could sort of share what have you been doing to motivate this sort of journey?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. So if you look at, the history of environmental concerns, we know about carbon and climate change, and we've all read the book, we've all got the T-shirt, and then we come to biodiversity. And it's such a new kind of area. When I say new, I mean not literally new, but where where a lot of companies are still really trying to find their feet, find which disclosure mechanisms would work for them, which platforms you should be reporting into, et cetera, right? So I would say that what we've seen as Harmony Gold is that there's a lot of investor questions coming out from the CDP platforms, from actual investors asking us about biodiversity, asking us what are we doing in terms of natural capital. Are we considering things like sustainable sourcing of, say, timber as an example? So they're posing those questions. So it's not just about now publishing a report and saying, hey, look at the great work that we've done, and you can find it on our website. The questions that are coming through from interested and affected parties is a lot more detailed. There's a lot more information that a lot of corporates are seeking in investment companies, etc. So I think that the benefits is that when you are disclosing and you're disclosing it correctly and accurately enough, it does hold your organization in a much better stead as compared to, say, a company B at the end of the day. So there are benefits to it. There are, verification, companies that follow the GRI standards that, you could use to do any kind of, audits and that kind of thing against certain KPIs that you would have put out into the market, etc. And then to obviously publish those findings of those reports, which we do at Harmony as well. And at the end of the day, it shows that the company that you're actually working for is a responsible company. It is mining with purpose, if I may call it that, and it is taking care of the environment at the same time, kind of thing. So yeah.
Thanks. Did that help answer the question? And I think if I understood the last question, you were asking what funding is available, particularly for smaller businesses in exploring your biodiversity impacts and dependencies. Is that correct? Okay.
COP16 and COP20.
Gabi, do you want to answer that? That's probably better. I mean, basically, it's just, the name, COP stands for Congress of Parties, so it's just the UN being really confusing, but both of them it's actually a number of other COPs. Dr. Makholela, you'll probably also be able to tell me a lot more about them, but they are all, it's a conference that surrounds after the treaty. So the specific treaty that for biodiversity is the Convention on Biological Diversity. So it's the COP for I don't know the full terminology. A COP for the COP16 of the Convention of Biological Diversity. So that's why there's multiple COPs, the same as the climate COP is specific on the climate agenda. So it's just a name, and then it's very confusing that they're called COP16 and COP22, and I don't know how many others are, but it's, that's not something we have much control over. It's just some more lingo and more acronyms. But yeah, Warwick, do you want to answer that question?
I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, why do we have the two? I mean, I think what's interesting is, probably the previous climate COPs, so the sort of COP28 and now this one, there is a lot more of a nature discussion in it, but we shouldn't be having two. You wouldn't have the conversation at a biodiversity COP and vice versa if you weren't addressing some of the same issues. So, yeah, we're seeing a little bit more of that interaction. Will it come together into one? Probably highly unlikely. But the fact that you're getting these conversations at both is critical.
And maybe on the funding, Daniel, can I put you on the spot if you know anything there? Whether there are funding opportunities for small businesses in the biodiversity space?
Yeah, I mean, I would think there are many opportunities. I think, across the value chain, right? Services, products. I think ecotourism obviously is very popular kind of discussion in the space. I think there's a lot of opportunities, and I think I'm glad to hear that question because I think it's encouraging that people start thinking around nature in terms of the backbone of our economy and what is a sustainable source for us kind of going forward. Sorry, is that a useful answer?
A little bit out of time, so of course, please come and ask afterwards. The panelists are here. We're just taking a small break now. I think we can still a 10-minute break. So for those online, please join us back again at 3:20. And can I hand over to Gabi first just to thank the panelists?
Grab my mic back. Yes, thank you to each and every one of you for sharing and traveling here today. And if there's any other more questions that we've got from online, we'll send them through to you for you to answer directly. I know you've shared your contact details. And then for those in person later, when we have our networking hootenanny later, then there's more opportunity to network. But thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
The next panel will be co-facilitated by two of our project managers from the National Biodiversity and Business Network within the Endangered Wildlife Trust, who have been instrumental in leading the conversation in the business advisory groups. So I wanted to please welcome Catherine Keane and Jess Tyrrell to the stage, our project managers who will be co-facilitating the next session. So you won't hear from me anymore, but thank you, and please give all the panelists a warm round of applause when they do enter the stage. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. I would just like to mention that we did have a panelist online who was also not able to join us, unfortunately having some technical problems, but we do have Sipungele who is online currently. All right, so I think, Ntaka, we're going to start the first question with you, and I know you have also prepared a couple of slides, and they will show in the background. Let me just get to the right page. Okay. So, Ntaka, you have also just recently been to COP16, and we're very interested to hear your take-home messages from what you experienced at COP16. And I know that Tsepang did speak into quite a lot of the outcomes that did happen there, but we're very keen to hear from your perspective. So the question to you is, reflecting on COP16, what were the most significant outcomes that you believe will impact biodiversity conservation efforts in South Africa? And how does SANBI plan to integrate the decisions and frameworks established at COP16 into its ongoing and future projects?
Thank you so much. As we move to the second slide, please. What was there was breaking news, let me say, at COP16, and I think Dr. Makholela also made mention that the COP was suspended. We didn't reach our conclusion, but there were some remarkable opportunities that did transpire, but I wouldn't dwell much on it, and which one of them was the establishment of the Khalimo Fund, and of course the looking at how parties have, next slide please, have progressed in terms of setting up their national targets as part of the implementing decision 15.6 of the Convention on Biological Diversity that was taken at COP 15. And then one of the key things was the planning, monitoring, reporting and review on the Annexure 2 that then also spoke to the role of the non-governmental organization as they have been put now. We shy away from the non-state actors as contentious, continue to be contentious. But one of the key things is that Annexure 2 of this particular decision, which has not yet been adopted, did make mention or provide the non-state actors or the non-governmental organization as they are, or relevant organization, to come up with the commitments. And you need to illustrate what are the direct drivers and the direct and the indirect drivers, the condition of biodiversity loss, how are you seeking to address them as we continue. And then there will be a progress for tracking that particular progress or commitment. And of key consideration is that SANBI is supporting in terms terms of as mandated in the National Environmental Management Biodiversity Act, to report on the state of biodiversity, and we do require that information to support you with gathering an appropriate data, which next year we will be also publishing our third National Biodiversity Assessment. We just came back from the writing retreat. Next slide, please. And then one of the other key thing is the mainstreaming of biodiversity, which was a standalone agenda item, which the thing that I wanted to highlight is that we are required to convene a community of practices in relation to support the mainstreaming agenda. And you're all aware that Target 15 on business and biodiversity, it's one of the mainstreaming agenda. So we need to continue with the community of practice and establish a viable one to support in terms of implementation. Next slide, please. And I think this was also made mention. I just highlighted that the national target setting process and the updating of NBSAPs, there's 44 NBSAPs, 190 national targets, and of key consideration, only 95 countries out of the 119, they managed to have a specific target on business and biodiversity. But you can also see that Africa at large, they did a lot of work in terms of submitting their national targets, but you must also look at the fact that a few countries in Africa managed to submit those national targets around Target 15, which we feel like there's still some work to do. Then there is an important note is that there is still work. The outcomes of the BAG needs to communicate and support, because you use best practices to communicate or to support other colleagues in the region to also integrate their own or set their Target 15 in their national NBSAP. We still have the opportunity because parties still need to submit the NBSAPs. Next slide, please. And then the exciting moment is that there was the Conference of the Party welcomed the selected entities and organizations that will be supporting or hosting the sub-regional and regional technical and scientific cooperation support center. And I'm happy to announce that SANBI is one of those, and we are in a process of setting up the technical support center and to operationalize. And then the main purpose is just going to support and promote and facilitate transfer and the use of appropriate technologies. We will be convening matchmaking, capacity building for both human and institutional support. And then we also count on partnership to deliver on this important piece of work. I will stop here.
Thank you so much, Ntaka. Very, very interesting, all that you have brought forward here today. Very much a key outcome from this BAG has been the fact that there needs to be more capacity building, and very noteworthy to hear you mention that, and that was also a key mention at COP16. So in terms of, I'm just going to move on to the next question posed to you as well, which is, considering the outcomes of COP16, what message would you then convey to South African businesses and then communities looking at a whole of society approach regarding their role in biodiversity conservation?
Thank you. You can go to the last slide before. Thank you. So set up a little bit of response in terms of how can the collaboration between business and the technical support center, because this is mainly to support the SANBI initiative as one of the technical support center. We need to, one of the key things that we are setting up as far as the implementation of the technical support center, because the TSC, as they are called, they're going to implement member states within the southern region to implement the obligation under the Convention on Biological Diversity, including the Global Biodiversity Framework. This is a wonderful opportunity, colleagues, that we can tap into this opportunity and then and be the leader in terms of translating what we have learned from the business advisory group. And one of the key things is that the business can collaborate with SANBI by sharing innovative technologies. We can co-develop tools for monitoring biodiversity impact. impacts in supply chain, creating open access platform for biodiversity related data. You all are aware that the next step that is going to happen is the reporting on the 7th National Report under the Convention on Biological Diversity. And we do require this information in order for us to then ensure that the national reports that are going to be submitted under the CBD are robust, they've got good data, and even on target 15. So we also need to support each other in terms of building multi-stakeholder dialogue, co-creating solutions that will align with business needs and biodiversity goal. You need to be part of what we are going to be setting up called the partnership committee, wherein you can support SANBI in some of the work that activities of the functions of the center, which include matchmaking, convening dialogue, hosting exchange groups, knowledge sharing, and many other activities. You also can assist us in building capacity within the sub-region, because if you look at the draft SADC Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, the work on business and biodiversity are also reflected, and they are reflected in the context of partnership. So we can partner together in terms of the delivery. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ntaka. And just to carry on from that discussion, I know you mentioned the business action plan, so that is an outcome of this project, and we are busy putting together a roadmap which will feed into the NBSAP that needs to still come out. So we're very excited about those results. We have seen some emerging trends from the BAG meetings, which we're very keen to share with you and share with DFFE as well, so that we can really take this forward, because in terms of business and biodiversity, I would say that it's still new to many countries as well as businesses as well. So thank you very much for that feedback, really appreciate it. Over to Jess.
Testing, okay. I just have a brief follow-up question. It might not specifically relate to the incorporation of business in developing the national strategy or the upcoming publication of the 13th national strategy. Is that next week? The national strategy that's due to be published next week. Is it the 13th one?
No, I didn't.
Okay, maybe I missed that.
The NBSAP is still yet to be developed.
Yeah, the NBSAP, yes. But has the national strategy not been in development? No. Okay, sorry. Then I'll claim that's my mistake, my misunderstanding. But I guess the question still relevant is, I think it's fitting for this panel, but the multi-stakeholder dialogue or kind of the multi-perspectives or collaboration amongst very diverse stakeholders, who is included in that collaboration process?
So what we are going to do is to issue a partnership call wherein those partners that would like to support the work of the Technical Support Center in the context of the Southern African Development Community, then they can come forward, and we will then convene a stakeholder, convene a committee in which, based on the needs assessment or analysis that was done by member states, because each member state is required to then indicate, as far as the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and their NBSAPs, what are the key needs that they want. We already done some Eagle View kind of a needs assessment. Some spoke about the need for knowledge, for monitoring data. Some spoke around capacity building in relation to spatial planning and resource mobilization, support towards the development of the NBSAPs and the monitoring frameworks, and so forth. So based on that, that is the kind of support that we will be providing to the member state, and supported by the partners that are already leading in that subject matter. But what we are going to do is not to recreate initiatives that are already already ongoing. When we know that a specific organization like EWT is doing a lot of work on Target 15, of course, we will have to partner with them to deliver those support to the member states that will be requiring support on Target 15.
Okay, no, thank you. That answers it. It's just a bit of a lead-on question to Roberto Calejo. I just wanted to gauge what specific biodiversity challenges Indigenous peoples and local communities are facing currently. I guess the second part is more related to the previous question, but it's how businesses can meaningfully tackle and address these challenges.
Sure. Maybe oh, there we go. But yeah, thank you so much, Dumela Makholela, and thank you for the time. I think that my colleague Daniel has really laid a wonderful foundation. He gives the monies and I give the stories. So he pays the bills in that respect from a CIB perspective. But I think it's important that maybe I ground some of the responses that I have to the question just around the fact that mine is more, if you will, lived experience, anecdotal in that sense. Everyone else is speaking NBSAP and partnership and all these wonderful acronyms. But I think it's also important that while the science tells us how a thing is happening, our practices tell us why a thing is happening. So I don't think anyone has ever asked why we have minerals. You know, why is it that gold exists? We know how it exists. We know how it's come about, but what is the usage thereof? And how do we then potentially tap into the indigenous knowledge that lies within communities that are there to understand what the relationship between the human being and the mineral is, or the human being and land is? And I think that these are some of the questions that at least buttress what the issue is in terms of indigenous communities and engaging quite meaningfully, because some of these things are thought to be so esoteric. They're too high flown, they're out there. But I think there are some practices that could really help the entire value chain around the biodiversity economy. I mean, it sounds completely out of it, but as a bank, one of the things that we did, maybe as a practical demonstration, is we took some of the research that CSR had done to say that the traditional health sector or traditional medicines in the country was valued at around 12 billion or so. And this was a few years ago, right? And we said, okay, how many of these people actually understand the value chain itself and whether they could engage differently? And we then took it upon ourselves to partner with the Gauteng Department of Health, and we said we're going to give financial literacy to traditional healers across the Gauteng province. And we did that. We went to all 5 regions, and one thing that is incredibly critical for us to understand is that it's a very sophisticated business, one, where a lot of people might not necessarily see it as the case. And number 2, it's a very cash-heavy business, of course. And we wanted to try and solve for the cash component and how could we create an ecosystem between the practitioner, agricultural practitioners, the client. How do we then also link into DTIC initiatives, DFFE initiatives to say, how do we bring everybody together? But what was central about that is we asked the practitioners, how can we help you? What is at the core of what it is that you want to do? And I think the starting point for us in trying to identify and solve some of those challenges is to firstly include traditional practitioners in the room and have them then tell us why stuff exists. Why are certain rivers doing what they're doing? And it is absolutely going to sound incredibly high flown. It's going to sound fantastical. But within those folklore, within some of those stories are very, very clear mechanisms of why certain things are done in the way that they're done. I mean, I find it a very interesting thing speaking about mining, and I share these stories just to prick consciousness in the audience. There are certain spaces, I suppose, in the Limpopo area where there was a mining house that had operations, and I don't know what the technical term for it is, but they'd reached the end of life or something of that sort. And a descendant from a royal family that was in the area just sort of walked around. He hadn't been on the land in a very long time. And after walking around, they then did another analysis, and they found other layers of minerals that they hadn't found before. And I don't think we can necessarily explain that, quote unquote, scientifically, because before they'd said there's nothing left. But what our traditional practitioners do help us to define, when you're in right relationship with nature, there are certain things that can then be revealed that won't be revealed if you're in a wrong relationship with nature. And I think that those are some of the stories that we need to get into around the biodiversity economy particularly, but also as we develop all of these plans, that we center them, being biased, in Afrocentric systems, in knowledge systems that deeply, deeply, deeply are rooted here. And we understand it's a plethora of systems. It's not the same, but in understanding that they're there, let's use them. Even if they are stories, even if they're folklore, there's some lessons there that we need to learn that we haven't quite scratched the surface of.
No, thank you. I think that's very beautifully put, and I'd imagine to some people in the audience maybe a different way of thinking about things, or something that hasn't necessarily been considered. And I do think there is value in, even though there's a strict science behind what we're all doing, I think the value of storytelling is undervalued and would definitely has a place at the table. And I think that emotional component a lot of the time is what can get people to act or understand it better at least. So thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Roberto Katlego. I just want to add on to that, not with a question, but also a general comment. So I met you online recently and was extremely excited to hear about the work that you're doing. I think in general, we tend to think quite linearly, like business is business, and then, everything else is not linear. So it's very good to put this into perspective, to hear about the different aspects of the work that you're doing, bringing it into biodiversity and business and what that actually means going forward. And then on top of that, some of the results coming out from hearing from our BAG members as well has been actions that they're already doing is mostly related to species and threatened ecosystems. And then when posed the questions of actions that they would like to be taking next, many of the answers and results and feedback coming back was storytelling. There needs to be more storytelling. There needs to be more showcasing of case studies. Businesses working together with communities, working together with indigenous peoples and local community groups and women's groups. And I think also in terms of where we are at the moment, coming out of COP16 and some of the outcomes being suspended, what is the answer? We're in a place now where we have to really think about a whole of society approach, because what we've been doing up to now, maybe we've been helping here and there, making changes, making differences in the world, but bringing in the whole of society approach, community of practice, is incredibly important. And so hence why we had this event today, to really bring together the broader stakeholder engagement. So on that, I would like to move over and onto Sibongile, who is online. And as mentioned before, Sibongile is director for the Women's Leadership and Training Program based in KZN. So Sibongile, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. Sorry that you couldn't be here in person, but we're very glad that you are joining us online, and let's hope that your Wi-Fi there holds. Meeting you earlier in this week, very, very interested and excited about the work that you're doing as well, and relating it back to all the discussions from today and from this stakeholder panel as well. So moving into your work, I want to ask you a question about how can business-led biodiversity initiatives support gender equality by ensuring that women have equal access to resources, training, and decision-making roles within conservation projects?
Okay, thank you very much. My apologies for not being there personally, but I'm happy to be here. So the challenges that we see in Women's Leadership and Training Program, so we're just going to take this community that is in KwaZulu-Natal in the Herigwala District Municipality. So what we see as challenges beside what is written down there, that the leadership of girls and women is not recognized in communities, especially the patriarchal communities, rural communities where we come from. So that is the big issue. However, we think at the same time, it is not the interest of patriarchy to give the rights, for an example, the rights to land for girls and women. So we don't think there's an interest on that. But we can see that there is a big drive from girls and women to push boundaries and break those boundaries that are stopping them to access land. And what is it that they do on the ground is that water is their responsibility. So they are working with resources like rivers, streams, and wells. So that is one area that girls and women are having their voice at this time, not waiting for men most of the time to do something about that, but they are just pushing that boundary of being able to access water and being able to protect it. At the same time, the land is a big issue, we know that, but we are also beginning to see women securing some land, the communal land or the private land, where they are able to produce their agricultural produce there. And that is what is a barrier, but also it has got an opportunity because girls and women are able to push that on that area. Another part is the appropriate technology. So there's a lot of that is needed from business to make sure that what the girls are able to test water, are able to understand their beds, and they're able to understand all the issues of biodiversity that they are working on. And we are interested in bedding because girls and women aren't encouraged to do bedding, but we are seeing that as something that is changing a lot from what the girls are doing in our communities. And we believe that there is an opportunity for agritourism, for ecotourism, and agricultural businesses that women can access in those areas if they could have support. And lastly, we believe that education for girls is the key thing. It's one other key thing, because if girls aren't receiving quality education, it is a problem. So we think business will be able to contribute into gender equality and biodiversity protection if girls and women can access education. At the same time, we are aware that business has to do its work all the time with people, not for people. As the other previous speaker has said, that it is important to recognize what people know. What is it that they are already doing? So the two slides that you are going to see, they are showing what girls are doing already. So like, as you can see now, they are protecting the rivers, they are water defenders. They go into bedding clubs, and we didn't see ourselves working with communities on bedding, and we've got birds that we knew of, like the red-chested cuckoo. We knew that it was a bird related to our ways of knowing in terms of food production, but we had birds that we were scared of, that we were, didn't have good relationship. So the picture below of those three birds are the birds that we are now working on, but in the past we didn't work on those birds. So we believe that business can assist on ways people, especially girls and women, are already doing some of the biodiversity work in their communities. Especially the finance for biodiversity is very scarce, so we believe that if that can be increased, that will be the best way for business to go, especially to make sure that the voice and the wellness of women is secured in rural areas. And why we say business should work with people, with the people, not for people, is because if people are protecting biodiversity, they are in fact protecting their identity, their spirituality, their wellness, and even after death, because the way they relate to who we are is based on biodiversity while we are alive and when we are dead. So the rivers, the forests, and the grasslands are the big part of who we are when we are alive and when we are dead. So we think it is important for business to realize that, and women have got a key role to play there, and it is not talked about because women, in most cases, their work is not considered to be, it's not communicated well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sibongile, and thank you for your insights on the work that you're already doing in that area where, with the girls, and I think you mostly mentioned that it's young girls that you're working with, but equally important is women and youth as well. And I think just to mention as well, you mentioned technology and knowledge transfer, and that's one of the Global Biodiversity Framework goals. And also from some of the results coming out of all these discussions that we have had in the past 2 years with our business advisory group, that target has also seen some traction. So thank you so much, Sibongile, for giving us some insight into the work that you're doing. And I think it leads into the next question for Samir. I know that you've also been doing some work out that side, but over to you, Jess, to ask Samir.
Quite long-winded, but I'll speak slowly. So in what ways can NGOs, non-governmental organizations, effectively collaborate with businesses in promoting biodiversity goals while also benefiting local communities and improving biodiversity conservation efforts?
Was long-winded. Thank you. Yeah, and I think the first thing that I want to say is that it's impossible to paint the NGO sector with one brush, because the NGO sector is so vast, so diverse, and each of us have a role to play. We just need to find our niche and find what the levers are that we can pull, and how we can make ourselves useful and interesting to the business sector. But I'll talk to this question from WWF's perspective as a sort of big international NGO, and obviously the Panda has power as a brand, and it gives us a very sort of privileged position with the corporate sector, and we try to use that privilege effectively and to the benefit of local people and the sort of green movement more generally. And I think that to summarize how we approach it, I would say that it comes down to 3 words. It comes down to relationships, partnerships, and journeys. And with corporates, sometimes it can be a bit impersonal. You see brands and you see WWF and Nedbank, and but ultimately it comes down to the people in those organizations and developing relationships with those people. And through those people, you create long-term relationships. And those relationships grow into partnerships, institutional partnerships. So definitely, take the time to develop those relationships, and that's why events like this are important for networking. But then, we talk about partnerships and journeys, and what we try to do is take the corporates that we work with through a journey from a sort of just participating in a business network. You pay a little bit of money, you're part of the network, you get access to forums where you can sort of learn and benefit from WWF's thought leadership and from the partners that we have access to, and through that we try to foster those relationships and take them on a journey from just being part of a network to potentially sort of working with us on developing their own strategies and potentially funding us, to something that we call a transformational partnership, which is long-lasting, deep. It's a two-way process where we influence the way that a corporate thinks about and engages in the sustainability space, and in turn we help them to sort of reach their sustainability targets and implement far-reaching projects. When how we do that is firstly we take them on this journey through. It's almost like a stewardship approach, where firstly we encourage them to look internally to understand the impacts that they're having, the approach, where their footprint lies, and we encourage them to make those sorts of impacts public, to set targets for themselves, to change themselves internally, and then to start looking beyond their fence line and start operating in the country, in the catchment, in whatever the sort of relevant geographical space is, to start having a more general impact. And we have tools to help them do that. There's the biodiversity risk filter, there's the water risk filter that starts to help people understand their footprints, their reliance on nature, their impacts on nature. And then we've got things like there's been a lot of talk about TNFD and the Science-Based Targets Initiative that will help companies sort of go along that journey to do some self-exploration, to disclose the impacts that they're having, and ultimately to set targets. And then we come in and say, well, you've set these targets, you're trying to be ambitious, how can we help you to achieve those targets?
Great, thank you. Just a quick question. Mm-hmm. Can you share, or I don't know, NDA-wise, but a success story of, say, on-the-ground conservation efforts that one of your partnerships has reaped?
Yeah, there's plenty of those. Look, I manage the Nedbank Green Trust, and I would love to talk extensively about all the impacts that we've had with Nedbank, but it has been a really successful partnership. But I was actually asked because Nedbank is well represented here, I'll talk to some other examples. So I think a really good one. It comes from the forestry sector, actually, and then obviously we've had Brent talking about the impacts that Mandi has had, and we've had a really long-standing relationship with Mandi that goes back 30 years. That's where I think we were quite instrumental in helping Mandi address the issues of wetlands, and but that's evolved into a broader sort of water stewardship partnership, and it's evolved beyond, because the other thing that we try to do is work at a post-competitive level, and to develop sort of partnerships and collaborations between different organizations. And this has grown from just working with Mandi to working with 3 of the biggest forestry sector organizations. You've got Mandi, SAPI since 2021, and now CHEP since 2023. And each of them are operating in different catchments and taking a water stewardship approach that addresses some of the risks that you find in those catchments, but building on many of the same learnings that we've got in that space. So a lot of it is built on multi-stakeholder partnerships. You mentioned that earlier. And in those partnerships, we integrate the voices of local communities, of the local NGOs, the smaller sort of the smaller community-based organizations, because that's fundamental to the way that we want to operate, because all of this stuff is it's a balancing act. You've got your corporates and your funders that have their own interests and they want to and their own agenda. We've got WWF, we've got our own strategy, our own agenda, and you've got the people that are living and working on the ground that have their own needs, their own ambitions, their own and if you imagine it as a Venn diagram, you got to put all of that together and find that sweet spot in the middle. And that's where we try to operate. And in all of these catchments, we found amazing opportunities to address the environmental risks while creating jobs, creating opportunities for local people and addressing their sort of fundamental human needs, from protecting natural springs, which are the main source of fresh water for many of these communities where water access is a major issue. And just to draw it back to the traditional leaders, we've had examples where we've gone out there thinking, okay, we're going to protect these water sources for the benefit of local people, only to encounter traditional leaders that say, oh, we use these for traditional purposes, and by protecting it, you could potentially affect the spiritual value of that water. So we've integrated the spiritual, the traditional healers into that sort of surveying process to understand where are the important water sources for water supply, which ones are important for medicinal purposes, etc. We do rangeland management. We've heard about this, the risks of overgrazing and erosion and the potential for sort of fire, and we, again, in all of these catchments where we're working, we are working with traditional grazing associations that in some areas have transformed again to what we call rangeland associations that integrate the traditional leaders, because the traditional healers, because they too are decision makers in the way that rangelands are managed. And in all these areas, it's about collective decision making, making sure that we're addressing the needs of the people while at the same time addressing the broader environmental and social challenges that these catchments are facing.
Brilliant, thank you.
Sure.
So I guess it's a big emphasis on participatory and equity. I think, Kath, it's...
Yes, thanks, Jess. Thank you, Samir. Actually, Jess, you stole my next question for Samir, but you went ahead and answered it, so that is absolutely fine. I just want to bring a perspective through in terms of everything that you're saying, how everything is linked, and you used the example of a Venn diagram, and then it got me thinking about ecosystems and how ecosystems all operate together, and you take one aspect of that ecosystem away, and then everything is impacted by that, specifically in the example of animals that are ecosystem engineers, that's the word I'm looking for. And then removing them, and even an aspect of the prey species that they eat, then everything is affected. Yeah. And it's so pertinent to understand that is how we operate as well, in terms of the businesses that are operating in rural areas, in terms of the work that we're all doing together, and how we're all linked, even if we might not recognize it or see it now. But we're all linked, and everything, the outcome is going to be, it's on us to determine our own outcome. And bring it back to the linear comment that I made, we cannot only be seeing in a linear sense. So I think on that, I'm going to go to my next question for you, Roberto Catlejo, which is, how can businesses best support Indigenous and local communities through their biodiversity initiative projects? And how can businesses ensure that Indigenous peoples and communities have access to resources as well as opportunities in conservation activities? And you might have touched on it a bit
Sure.
before, but if you can go further into that, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's quite important. Let's listen, firstly. Right, so let's not go in there and just thinking, oh, we know, we're gonna tell you that, but let's listen, and also potentially listen with a deeper curiosity to hear the story behind the story. So, for instance, you're referring to these ecological engineers. There may be a story about a dung beetle and what it does, right? But it speaks exactly to the fact of the ecosystem. And so what a lot of people may necessarily think is fantastical stuff and it has no real relevance, when you drill down and you hear the lessons, you then understand why it is that there were certain festivals that happened at a certain time of year because you understood that the rivers are doing a certain kind of thing at this time of year. And so there was that management, right? And I think maybe in addition to listening, it's important that we understand just a few things, throwing it out there. One, human beings are part of that ecosystem. And I think, yes, we are a bit of a, to use a colleague's words, cantankerous species or a dodgy one, but we're part of the system. And so when we view ourselves as part of the system, then potentially we may be less damaging to the system. Sometimes I think the language that is used is almost as though we're this alien thing that's been brought in to displace the entire system. I think when we then begin to say that humans are part of the system, they may be doing a little bit better. And I think our foreparents understood, and I'm answering the question purposefully in the way that other elders would answer it so that business can go and decipher what I'm trying to say, right? Our foreparents understood these epochs and changes, and so that institutional memory still lies within the stories that have been passed down, right? And so when we're speaking things like ESG and how people can actually have a more participatory process, I'm waiting for a board of a major company, that I might even challenge my own bank, to have indigenous knowledge practitioners sit there and to actually ask the questions of them. Why are you pursuing this course? And what does it mean to pursue this course? You know, if we're saying we want to be net zero and so forth and so on, it's a dodgy thing for me to say, but why did coal exist in the first place? Why did Mother Earth allow for coal to exist? And what is the purpose now for coal? In addition, of course, to any other sort of, if you will, space. But I think maybe just second last, we're deeply connected to the world and to the land. And we must maintain that connection at all costs. All of us must maintain that connection, whether it's through gardening or whatever the case, but we must get our hands into the ground because we're part of the ground. And I think finally, there's so many things that are part of that biodiversity system in the lived and visible appearance of our people who are still sort of living in that indigenous way, one, or also two, on their certain national days. The feather that the king puts in is part of that biodiversity system. The traditional medicines that he or she has used, because kings to us are non-gendered, so even a woman can be a king. But so it's important that we understand even the medicinal stuff that have been used come from the ground, the skins that they're wearing. So there are ways in which they knew how to make sure that if we're killing a certain amount of the population and we're doing certain rituals and sacrifices, how do we make sure that 50, 100 years from now, we still have a lion that we could use to be able to crown a new king? And some of those systems are lost in language or in Western language systems. But I've gone on too long.
No, thank you so much. And I think a lot of us often think about 100 years' time, what is the world going to look like? And this is why this work that we're doing is so important now, and it's all about what can we do right now to help shape our future. And yeah, really agree with everything that you've said, because it's so fundamental right now, where we find ourselves in a biodiversity crisis. So there is one last question for Sibongile. Sibongile, are you still online?
Yes.
Great. Over to Jess.
So speaking of women as kings, Sibongile, can you tell us if, or in your experience, what some of the barriers women face in participating in biodiversity initiatives and how businesses can help remove these barriers?
Thank you very much. As I have indicated before, the patriarchy is the biggest barrier for women. And in what way? And for me, it's I can see it that there are so many things that women are doing in protecting the biodiversity. At the same time, that knowledge is looked down upon. And that for me is a problem, which I'm asking for business to take forward and look into that. What are these stories and lived experiences of women that exist and that are alive even at this time? And like one of the questions that we are asking ourselves at this time in our work is the women with the sixth finger, on one hand. because for us, we know that those women are women who are carrying gifts and wisdom of plants and of food production. And how much do we know about the women with the sixth finger? We know very little, and we don't harvest from that knowledge on who these women are and why they've got this gift and how are they using this gift or not using this gift in protecting biodiversity. So that is one area of bringing women's stories forward in trying to find solutions. Another thing that we're trying to work on now, we are asking ourselves a question on what will happen if the children are taught today to protect biodiversity, both from the indigenous knowledge and the scientific knowledge. What will happen with that child or with those children in 30, 40, 50 years to come? Some of the traditional leaders have told us that they are not doing it for the result now. So they are aware that they are not going to see the result of that initiative now, but at least they are talking about it. We are talking about it as a community of how will it look like if the children of our village are connected to who they are and also to the responsibility of protecting biodiversity, while at the same time looking for increasing their livelihood and protecting ecosystems at all costs. So those are the main issues that we are looking into, and that needs a partnership. And so we are calling for business to partner with communities on those issues. And we know that stories can be dominated by men in rural patriarchal communities, but we know that in each of those communities, there are people who are committed to be in those areas, who have chosen to be in those areas. There are young people, 20 years ago, we saw young people, going to cities, but at this time, we are seeing young people remaining in our rural areas, some coming back to the rural areas. And we began to ask ourselves questions on why. And we are realizing that the young people that are coming, the young people today, they are looking and searching for something that is beyond the money as we know it. They are searching for the souls and their souls. And one of the young people reminded us that the erosion of the soil is the erosion of the soul. So I think she had that from one of the environmentalists. I can't remember his name very well. Bernard, I think that's his name. So she reminded us about that, and then, trying to help us to understand why are they coming back or why are they remaining in these rural areas as young people, because what we've been taught is that you come from the rural area and you live that backwards, life. So with that, we are saying there is a lot to be done for grassland restoration, wetland restoration, forest restoration, and the huge dongas that are in our areas. I come from a very eroded area, which is one of the reasons I'm still working here and remain in my community. It's because that soil has disappeared in front of me, and I know when it was still a grassland, and I know now when it is a huge dongas. So it is that responsibility that I have, but also other young people are beginning to realize that it is their responsibility to do something about that. Not on their own, with the partners, as some of the people are here and are able to see communities as key role players in biodiversity protection. Thank you.
Thank you, Sibongile. it makes me think about how not the BAG members, but a lot of businesses obviously prioritize profit over planet, and it's about, in an ultra-capitalist society, we're living for tomorrow, or I have to, maximize outputs by tomorrow, and there isn't the long-term future vision. I think Kathy also spoke to that. And it sounds as if a lot of community members and the youth, especially the youth, are obviously concerned about the future. I mean, I like to think I'm quite youthful and also quite concerned about the future. And I guess marrying those, having to get businesses to realize that their profit is potentially at the expense of our futures. So that's just the 2 cents. But, yeah.
Thank you so much, Sibongile. It also does remind me of a video I watched about a young member from a rural community in KZN that actually left to go to the bigger cities, I think Johannesburg, tried to make the money, as you were saying, and then came straight back to the community and actually started doing environmental education work and actually teaching members of the community that he knew and knows. And that was a project actually initiated by WWF as well, with the water stewardship program. And I think, like we were talking about, connecting all these initiatives together is really embedding that fundamental knowledge of actually where I come from is important as well, and I can make a difference in the area that I come from, and with the help of businesses, and that's also their role there as well to really facilitate that. So thank you so much, Sibongile. Great work that you're doing. So amazing to hear from all the panelists today, and in this panel specifically, thank you so much, Samir, Roberto, Katlego, and Taka. We're not done yet, so please, Sibongile, don't leave yet. We are going to open up the questions to the floor. So we're going to have 2 questions to in-person audience, and then we'll open up to the online.
So to everybody online, please submit your questions either via the Q&A or the chat.
Kish has a question.
Thank you very much. My question is actually for Intaka. Indigenous people and local communities, I feel that there's a bit of I see we might have lost the online link. I feel that there's a bit of a disjuncture between some of these global, the frameworks at a global level, when people are talking about IPLCs and how it's put together, which is a really good exercise, but it's done with a lot of the North influence, and it gets watered down when it actually has to come to the ground on South Africa as an example, or in South Africa as an example. And I feel that disjuncture makes it very difficult for Indigenous people and local communities to really and actively partake in opportunities around biodiversity. How do we change that? How do we actually get an IPLC framework in the South African context around biodiversity?
Thank you so much. Can I go ahead? Yeah, that is an interesting observation, but I just want to indicate from our end, the South African National Biodiversity Institute, we even actually signed a memorandum of understanding with Nature Speaks, which is doing an incredible work around the river systems. We have also partnered with the Department of Water and Sanitation, and they're doing a lot of capacity building work and to support the integration of knowledge system into conservation of biological diversity. That's one highlight. But as we move forward through the Technical Support Center, we intend to maximize on some of the relationship that we have with Indigenous people people and local communities to support the work of the integration of knowledge systems into the and support our member states that we will be supporting to also reflect upon the role of the indigenous people and local communities. And I'm going to say it in the context of the fact that I think when we had from the feedback of from the COP, one of the landmark achievement was the new program of work on Article 8J that also integrates the indigenous people and local communities work. I think I've listened attentively with my colleague Riavetsu here when he was reflecting on some of the knowledge systems, and I appreciated the fact that the indigenous people and local communities, they've got a role. The government, I think, through the different structures, even the department, they've got the people and parks work that is also happening that also embrace or integrates the local authorities into their program of work. And there's also COCTA, there's the National Health of Traditional Leaders and many others that are currently even supporting. I've seen them while I was part of the department where they were also contributing into different political inputs, policy inputs, not political, but policy inputs, where even in the recently convened National Biodiversity Economy in Daba, the local authorities were highly represented and they were influencing the work. And again, also just to appreciate the new, it's no longer new, but the biodiversity policy, the transformative goal, which I feel like it's quite a progressive goal for South Africa, because it does recognize the role of indigenous people and local communities in the different facets. And in addition to that, SANBI, we are in a process as part of the NBA the National Biodiversity Assessment, I think that's the one that you asked, is still underway. But one of the critical things is that we are also doing an assessment on the cultural sites, which is one of these are the kind of remarkable things that you are going to see through the report, which will then assist us in terms of valuing biodiversity going forward. And we are also in a process of establishing an office on indigenous knowledge system within the organization, taking into account the number of the data that we are also sitting with that support biodiversity conservation, and within the context of the three objectives or the three others, the four goals that are also articulated under the white paper, which is conservation, sustainable use, access and benefit sharing, and transformation. And we don't wish to leave anybody behind. I'm not sure if that is suffice. Thank you.
Anyone else from the floor?
Thank you very much to all the panelists. Quite informative. My name is Amanda Nyingwa. I'm from the GIZ program, Bioinnovation Africa, and ABS Compliant Biotrade in Southern Africa. So our program, we work with biodiversity-based indigenous economic sectors, such as your buchu, rooibos, honeybush, etc. And within these economic sectors, we've also been working with SMMEs. And what we've realized is that some of these SMMEs struggle to get access to funding. And we heard earlier that there is funding that the private sector must provide for biodiversity, but what about the SMMEs? How can they access that funding? And this is where I also share that my question is specifically to Riaubetswe Katleho, and really what we've been trying to do together with our partners and our collaborators as GIZ is we're looking at a systemic financial mechanism that supports the building of a pipeline of investment-ready SMMEs that can go to financiers and NOC that are coming specifically from the bioeconomy and biotrade, and even more specifically, indigenous biotrade. And so my question to you is, how can we overcome those investment barriers that seemingly that SMMEs are facing? And what could be the role of storytelling in actually shifting the narrative for the financiers so that they can know that these SMMEs are actually bankable and that you can invest in them? And then lastly, my question is, what would the financiers would like to see these SMMEs? How would you like them to be presented so that they are investment ready? And we've just started this process of building this pipeline, but I'd be very keen to understand, because what struck me when you started speaking is around that you did a training for the traditional knowledge medicine and traditional healers on financial training and financial literacy. So I'm really, as we build this pipeline of investment-ready SMMEs, I'm really keen to understand how would you like them to be seen so that they are investment-ready, but also what could be the power of storytelling so that we shift the narrative at how financiers look at these SMMEs.
Sure. I think I want to answer the question in two ways, right? First, and maybe Kathy and colleagues must give me permission. First, I'm answering as just a practitioner, then I'm going to put the finance hat back on. As a practitioner, there are not enough of us in the room. That's the truth. And the unfortunate part is it's not necessarily just quote unquote a net bank problem. It's a system issue in that, and you see this is now the political side of me coming through. When we decide on projects and credit and financing and how we're going to do things, sometimes the biases of the people in the room affect the decision-making process. And so we're going to only stick to that which we think is bankable because it's been bankable in the past. Not that it's always going to be bankable, but that's the only thing that we know. And I think it's incumbent on people like myself and others to go and challenge that environment and say, can we have other people that just contribute and say, to give you an example, when we did the training for the traditional health practitioners, I said to them, and there were about 30 of them in each region. I said it would be very easy for you guys, amongst the 30 of you, to come up with 50 million rand. And they didn't flinch. And they said, we can do it tomorrow. These are people that already have the money. They have the capacity, right? So can you imagine 30 traditional health practitioners coming to you and saying, we've got 50 million. We want 200 from you. And we're trying to set up something of a traditional discount in this locality. Do you know that banks today are going to say no? They've got the money, right? So they're asking for further capacitation. But the reason why the bank will say no is not because there is no money, there's no capital, there's no security. It's because it's a sector that they haven't explored. And so it is that the GIZs of the world have to come on board with us and say, here are the cases, right? Here are the financial metrics. But then we, and I'm putting on the bank hat again, we have to also go and ask, credit, what are you looking for? When you want to support this, what are you looking for? If it's bankability, give us 2 years. Let's go back with the GIZ and say to the people, first open an account. Right? Have a business account, be able to have, and I'm getting a bit granular here, but for the purpose of the example, be able to have tracked, right, financial behavior, so that when you come back and you're asking for 100 rand, we can see what you've used 600 rand for over the course of 3 years, so that we know that you have that. And these are all things that we're not even speaking formalization of the sector in a big way. No, it's just stuff that you can do yourself to enable you as a business to say, I've registered, I'm compliant, here's my business account. Then GIZ can come and say, okay, we can give you this much, let's see how you use it. We get into a partnership where we see exactly how they use it. Our foundation could partner, whatever the case might be. Once we've given some of that other technical capacitation, then we're able to move and say we've selected 10 of these businesses. Because the DTIC has that fund, by the way. They have those funds. The government has them. The DTIC has a bioprospecting fund, and it was located also in the Innovation Hub, where they were taking people through to say, we want permits, we want licenses. Yeah, you see, I'm getting technical, and I wanted to stick to storytelling. But it's important for us to be able to say, how do we bring all of these funds together? But let's also select practically viable businesses. And that's where we're going to have a problem, because everybody then thinks they're viable. Right? So even on the example, you're going to mention Rooibos, you're going to mention Buchu. I have a particular issue around these definitions, around indigenous communities, because black communities are fighting amongst themselves as to who's more indigenous than the other. And that then becomes the issue, is that the Khoi community, the Kikukwa, the Khoi, the San, come and say, no, we were here first, you did. And then when we want to speak issues of biodiversity economy financing, the business world is like, you guys are not organized, so we're not going to enter the fray. And then leading up to the question where you were saying that the global north is the one that's prescribing, because it's easier. It's easier in Australia. It's easier in North America, right? It's a homogenous group of people in that area where the Sasquatch can say, yeah, this is who we are, and this is what we're doing. Here, it's not one person in a particular area. And so those challenges are fraught, but we've got to have agreement. And once, what do you call them? IPLCs, ne? Once they have agreement, once we have agreement, I promise you it is a sector that is going to unlock jobs, it's going to unlock economic benefit, because 70% of this country already visit traditional health practitioners. Some very publicly, some undercover. Can you imagine the story as I close? My great-grandmother used to be trusted by clinicians in the Odendal area, particularly around obstetrics and gynecology. One of the gifting areas in traditional health is around maternity. And what they used to trust her with was the effect to say, we want to make sure that this baby is aligned properly before you give birth. So the doctor, the gynae, would send the patient from the hospital to her to massage the belly. And a day or two later, then be sent back to the hospital to then go and say, you can go and give birth, because now your baby is in the right position. These are not foreign stories. They are not like small. There are a plethora of stories. Now, can you imagine if those people are given capacitation? She has a practice room. She has things. How many people are hired by the practice room? How many things can be developed around that space? And if there's just one story in Odendal, if you multiply that by 200, what are you going to get? Just a view.
Thank you, Roberto Katlejo. I hope that answered your question in many different ways. You can chat afterwards. So we are running out of time, and we do still need to wrap up this meeting and this workshop. I think we do have a question from online, and there's a question from Solela. So I hope that you are still online. I'm going to read out the question. It is quite a long one, and it might be directed at you, Ntaka, again. But let me read it, and let's see if any of the other panelists can also speak into this. So concerning the collaboration process of multi-stakeholders, that urban developers and engineering companies who work closely with businesses and the expansion for economic development, how can we strengthen developers and engineers already included in South Africa's NBSAP for biodiversity conservation as part of EIAs? And then are there incentives for them, or any means, or any means of the panel can think on this? Did you get that?
It's a lot of concept. But like, if I can just talk from the SANBI perspective, yes. Is the fact that we have been supporting a number of through policy tools such as our BGF that provide you with a lot of data that supports the development of the IDPs. We also produce the National Biodiversity Assessment that tells you about the state of biodiversity, species composition, and which species are being under threatened, threatened species, which ecosystems are currently threatened, and that is the type of information that you need to integrate into your tool. Including the EIA tools. We also support the EIA tools by providing information and data in relation to those realms that I've indicated. So I think there's some work that we are doing that really supports the decision-making tools, and colleague is welcome to also interface with our website and the data sets that we do have. We also produce a lot of special layers which also inform decision-making processes. I'm not sure because it's so intertwined. Or maybe the colleague can just come back and clarify.
No, thank you. That's fine. Yes.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the point about engineers is an important one, because I think that they're a bit of a missing link often in these conversations. When you talk to the engineers that are designing the infrastructure, they're often totally oblivious to the impacts or the reliance on biodiversity, on ecosystems, etc. So the guys that are building the dams are thinking about the concrete and all those technical things. They're not thinking about the catchment up above the dam. And we speak a lot about ecological infrastructure, and I think that we need to find those leverage points where we can start to influence the way that the engineers and the planners and all of these guys are thinking and designing their infrastructure. And I think that there's been this infrastructure fund that's just been recently developed, and I think that that's perhaps a leverage point that we could focus on to say, if you're funding government-funded infrastructure, you need to integrate biodiversity into your thinking and your planning, and we need to make sure that the engineers are being exposed to this sort of thinking.
Exactly. More awareness and dialogues.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. And if there aren't any other questions from online, you have another question? Yeah, sure.
And this is in respect to the TCS. I noted that in your diagram of Africa that you had provided is that there are centers. I saw that there was a Southern Africa, there was an East Africa, Central and West Africa, as well as North Africa. I just want to understand the TCS that SANBI is leading on together with some of the collaborators that you're calling on board. Is that for the SADC region or is it for Africa as a whole?
Thank you so much. You could see that we were on the tip of the of the continent. So we will be supporting member states within the Southern Africa. We are yet to get confirmation in terms of those countries, because each country would then, through their national focal point, requested to indicate which centers they would like to be supported. So far from our side, there are a number of countries from the Southern Africa that have confirmed, but we, the Secretariat still needs to communicate that. And maybe just to also put you in a place of rest, we are in conversation with GIZ, the colleagues that are leading on the BAAP, it's called the Biodiversity Innovation Africa, where we will be supporting some of the indigenous people. We are intending to support IPLC and SMMEs in terms of areas, train of the trainers for access and benefit sharing. And I'm going to raise it in the context of the fact that you are also relevant as business, because Target 15 also requires you to ensure compliance with the provisions of access and benefit sharing. And that's where the issues of indigenous people and local communities comes in with their knowledge systems that is being translated into business ideas. So we need to have a conversation with amongst ourselves. And I feel like those are some of the initiatives through the Technical Support Center that we would like to bring on board and support not only the Southern Africa, but also share lesson learned with other regions. She's good now.
Thank you, Ntaka, for answering that. I think in terms of time, we just want to open it up to the audience and also to anyone who's still online, just to find out any reflections, experiences from the work that they are doing, or even from what has come out from today's discussion, in terms of how do we see as a collective taking this forward? How do we take this work forward? All the challenges that we've spoken about, all the solutions that we have touched on, things that are working, things that are not working. How do we take this forward, and what is the next step? I would really like to hear from the audience and from the online before we end off for today. Yes.
I think, am I audible? One of the key aspects or the key highlight under the like when we were busy negotiating the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework was the need for the whole of government and the whole of societal approach. And this was brought about, if you look at the previous Aichi targets that were part of the 2011-2020 strategic plan, is that it was perceived as parties' initiative. Parties were the one that were responsible for ensuring or driving it. But this time around, all of us are challenged to look at biodiversity as we are being challenged as custodians of biodiversity to take care of it in order for now and for the future. So if we want to live in harmony with nature, one of the key things is to ensure that we are also part of the process. And through the, I think, Section C of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which is very fundamental, I want to urge you that when we are considering the business targets and how are we going to drive the implementation going forward, is that we need to integrate the elements of Section C, which also identify the role of indigenous people and local communities, the role of women and youth. It also tells you in terms of some of the not necessarily principles, but it gives you some guidance on cross-cutting issues that you need to take into consideration towards implementation. And I think that there is an opportunity, Catherine, that we need to take into account Section C, the role of Section C when you're looking towards the development of the national targets. And then the other thing that I feel like you have concentrated mainly on the disclosure, the impacts on biodiversity, but we left the last element that talks to the compliance with the access and benefit sharing. And South Africa, as we are being described, we are saying that we are a nature-based economy. And then the nature-based economy, then it depends on the role of indigenous people and local communities as the custodian of knowledge. The reason why you know that rooibos is a tea is because somebody has acquired that knowledge. My grandmother, she's quite old, but one thing that interests me about her, she will tell me when the sun comes in certain level within the house, that what time is it? And then when you look at the time, it is exactly that time. When the skies are behaving somehow, she will tell you that it's about to rain, go home, and so forth. So those are some of the indigenous knowledge systems. And then I want to also bring you an example. I come from Vuani in Venda. When I was doing my degree, one of the key things that one of the subjects that I was doing, it was on resource management and water resource management. And we had to go to Lake Fundudzi. It was my first time encountering with Lake Fundudzi. It's a sacred place. And then the conservation that has been happening there is that you cannot go there in certain times and certain and without the custodians of the Chiaba family. So those are some of the things that has helped in terms of the conservation, because if by now you would have been following in terms of the state of the lake, you would have think that now it had succeeded into other successions, but now the water is still there, and it has a remarkable story to tell around how conservation has been happening in different places. The Tatevondo, where you are told that there is a white lion in the middle of the tea plantation, it has been left like that as part of the conservation efforts. Those are some of the things that I'm saying, that the indigenous knowledge system, how we had preserved biodiversity in the past, is still relevant even today. And that's why you even see that at the last COP, one of the indigenous people and local communities stand firm and indicated that they want to be part of the decision-making body within the convention. And that's why we have a subsidiary body now as we are speaking. And these are some of the things that I'm saying, that let's look into that as we move forward. The role of all the stakeholders within the Target 15, including you and myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Ntaka, and that really actually wraps up and solidifies what has been said here today, and the comment from Roberto Catlejo on how we really need to realize that we are part of it, and we're part of the plan, but we're part of biodiversity. And when we start recognizing that and actually realizing the importance of knowing that, then we'd make differences in how we act and treat people and treat nature and the environment. So on that note, we have about 10 minutes or less than that. So I'm going to hand over to Gabi. But before we do, I just want to thank the panel once again. Thank you so much for coming out here today, for sharing insights, extremely highly valuable points that have come up from today. And we're very excited to take all of this forward. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much to all of those panelists in the last panel. It was very insightful, very passionate, and I think shows the depth of caring that we all have for this topic in our different ways, and I really deeply appreciated that. And just in terms of next steps and where we want to take this conversation going forwards, we're going to keep this conversation going as much as we can. I think a lot of the insights from the past year from the Business Advisory Group are now being consolidated into our end documents, just in fulfillment with this project. But beyond the project, this work, and I think that's been highlighted by everyone, needs to continue its momentum. And we want to open up for any suggestions of collaborations and activities. We'll help connect organizations to other organizations or businesses to learn more from each other. We will be putting a lot of resources on our resource hub on our website, particularly pertaining to all of the findings from this process. Some going to be some very impactful infographics that are going to be there summing up some of the key findings, as well as the policy documents there relevant to South Africa and NBSAP examples from some of the countries we've looked at and some of our research. We invite anyone to add anything useful that you would find to the repository, and also request information and what you would like to see. If we can't access those sorts of tools or reports or case studies or findings, those are big gaps, and that needs to be highlighted, and maybe we can connect the right people to finding those. So that's an open invitation to everyone, please, to use the Resource Hub and help develop it further. And I want to take one of the sentences, I think, which Ntaka said, was that there's lots of processes happening in multiple different ways that are all trying to achieve the same thing, and we need to collaborate and work together. So We will also be updating everyone from the website and via our social media on processes and next steps after this and ways to get involved. And I just, in summation, really want to borrow words from the previous panel who said things in a much better way than I could. And when I attend events, I always write down some key quotes as triggers for my own memory of real messages from the day and learnings. And the two I wrote down today, so Samir really summed up the collaboration perspectives and what can happen there. And I wrote down it's relationships, partnerships, and journeys. And I think this here is part of that. We're building relationships here. This needs to move forward to even more partnerships. We've spoken a lot about partnerships, particularly in the first panel. In the second panel, some of the gaps were highlighted there. And we can't do this alone. We need to do this together. And the journey is taking along everyone with us, and particularly around communication and capacity building that was being highlighted. So we're going to be doing some deep thinking around capacity building and communication tools and helping. And we'll reach out to all our partners here to collaborate on those. And then the last quote that I want to leave everyone with as a final message from today from Riabatswe Kadlejo was, and I loved this, it's let's listen firstly and with a deeper curiosity. And I think the lessons that we can share with the rest of the world from the immense work that we're doing here with limited resources, with very passionate people, with an openness to collaborate and to share and to break down silos where we can, is something that I'm very much heartened by, and I have a lot of hope for the future in terms of the partnerships between business and NGO sectors and policymakers and government, and talking the right language. So with that, I want to just thank very deeply from the bottom of my heart each and every one of you here who's been part of the process, who's walked the journey with us, who's asked some hard-hitting questions. Sometimes they weren't answers, sometimes they led to more questions. Everyone online and everyone in future who will be watching this, because it's going to be part of the database online when we'll upload the video to YouTube. And this is the start of something that could be very big. And we all have a willingness to collaborate and share. And let's keep that momentum going. So we will be reaching out to you, and thank you for your participation, and thank you in advance for all of the hard work that's still to come to achieve some great things for conservation. So thank you. And with that, I close this webinar, and thank you to everyone online. Safe travels if you are traveling. Please join us if you're here in person for networking, some well-earned refreshments. And if I could ask the panelists just to wait behind for some photos on the stage. And thank you. Go well.